We're live.
All right, welcome everybody. It is Thursday, January 15th. This is House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. We are here today to take some testimony on the fiscal health and oversight of our municipal utilities. So we'll quickly go around the room and introduce ourselves. And then we always ask everybody who's in the room to introduce themselves quickly. And then we'll turn it over to our witnesses. And thank you all for joining us. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnbury.
Richard Bailey from Lamoille 2.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kleppner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Laura Spelio, London 2.
Great. And in the room.
Bren Tatro, interning for Representative Dan Noyce.
Awesome.
Gabrielle Molina with Downs Rockland Martin, listening on behalf of the electric arms.
Okay.
Eric Johnson, Commissioner, Vermont Department of Public Service.
Welcome.
Jonathan Wolf with Primer Piper on behalf of Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. And just so everyone knows, Ken is downstairs in Senate Natural Resources and Energy and will be up to it.
Great.
Scott Johnstone with Morrisville Water and Light, and these days also with Hyde Park and Hardwick.
Great.
Peter Sterling, Renewable Energy.
Dana Perry, the Grass Group on behalf of Elko.
Super. All right. Thanks everybody for being here. And Ed, are you going first? Yeah.
That was my understanding, yes.
I see head nodding. Okay. Thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us. And for the record.
Great, thanks. For the record, this is Ed McNamara. I'm chair of the Vermont Public Utility Commission. And apologies I couldn't be there in person. Sharing is not always caring, and I didn't want to give everyone else what I've got. So, so I do have a quick PowerPoint. Sorry, just reacclimating. Just sent a request to Alex.
Great.
Sorry, Alex, I should have done that earlier.
And just so while you're doing this, just so witnesses and committee know, we do not have testimony scheduled after this until lunch.
So you really linger.
No, I just say we're not under time pressure to wrap by 9:45 or anything. We have a gap in our schedule, which sometimes happens. So we're not in a hurry. You certainly don't have to stay for lunch if you don't want to.
Want to make sure folks can see
We
the
can.
slide that's up. All right, great. Thanks. So I just wanted to give a quick context here. As a reminder for folks, Public Utility Commission is a quasi-judicial body with oversight of public utilities, including the municipal electric utilities. By way of context, I understand that news regarding Hyde Park Electric helped prompt today's session. I know that's not the entirety of the session, but that does seem to be a major driver. So the commission has two open proceedings regarding Hyde Park. One is an investigation into the financial status of the utility, and the second is a pending rate increase by Hyde Park. So both of those are contested cases. I'm not going to be talking about either of those cases. You have three other people heavily involved in those cases who are testifying this morning, and they're much better situated to discuss specifics regarding Hyde Park. So what I'm intending to do today is provide an overview of primarily the rate setting process in front of the PUC, and then answer any high-level questions. And then I'll be dropping off so folks can feel a little bit more free to talk about the specific cases involving Hyde Park.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Again, a little bit more context. So Vermont has 14 municipal electric utilities. There's also Green Mountain Power, the only investor-owned utility in the state, or distribution utility. And then there is two cooperative utilities as well. I want to point out that the municipal utilities, there's significant differences between the utilities just in terms of scale. City of Burlington, about 19,600 customers. Jacksonville Electric in the southern part of the state, about 700 customers. They're operating on very, very different scales. They're subject to the exact same regulation. There's also significant differences in rates, and I'm not picking on Burlington. It's just they happen to be easy to find. So the rates here, there's customer charge $10, just over $10, and then most of the municipal utilities have what's called an initial block and then a tail block. So the first 100 kilowatt hours tend to be less expensive. And then after that, it is more expensive. Partly that was a conservation measure, and partly it had to do with specifics about New York Power Authority, very cheap power, going back to the 1980s. But you can see here, Burlington, just looking at the initial and tail block, 13.5 cents roughly, and just over 18 cents for the tail block, compared to Northfield, which is 6 cents for initial block and just over 13.7 for the tail block. So the rates vary significantly by utility as well. Another aspect, when we talk about municipal electric utilities, it is not confined to the municipality itself. The service territory for every single municipal electric, there actually might be one, but the vast majority of municipal electrics in Vermont extend beyond the political boundaries of the municipality. And one other thing for context, if I'm in regional meetings, some national meetings, people are surprised that we regulate 17 electric utilities all the same. Majority of states do not actually regulate municipal electric utilities, at least in the rate setting context. They leave that to the municipal board to figure out what the rate should be. So I'm not going to try to provide every single regulatory requirement that the electric utilities, including the municipals, the munis have. There's a lot. I'm just going to name the most relevant ones here today. Every 3 years, all electric utilities file an integrated resource plan. And essentially what it's doing, this is a statutory requirement in Title 30 that stretches back to, I believe, the late 1980s. And it's saying that the utility should be looking out over a 20-year horizon. And how do you provide service to customers at least cost? And by least cost, it includes environmental cost, not just economic costs. Historically, these integrated resource plans, these IRPs, have focused primarily on load growth and power supply strategies. The last couple of years, we've been starting to touch more on capital planning with potential increases of load, or what we're seeing in increases in load from electrification, electric vehicles, heat pumps. What are the costs to the utility to build out their infrastructure in order to meet that load? So that's one planning aspect that's important, happens every 3 years. The department is very heavily involved in that. Department of Public Service, and the PUC is involved in that review. But mostly what I want to talk about today is the process for filing rate increases. Just going to jump right into that. And there's the full rate case, which is traditional. And then in the last 5 years or so, there's been a simplified process, or a process for simplified rate increases as well. Section 225 of Title 30 is the full process. Utilities are not required to file rate increases or rate changes. Occasionally there's decreases. There haven't been any in a while, but they're not required to file on any specific schedule. It's not like every December 1st or whatever period. It is generally when the utility needs increased revenue, or it's collected so much revenue that it should be returning it to customers. It's a little bit of an art. It's not entirely a science. And that's in part because rate requests, when you file a rate request with the Public Utility Commission, again, we're quasi-judicial. We operate, especially in rate cases and contested cases, like a court. So it's expensive. It's expensive for ratepayers. So the rate request itself has a resource cost, and that is both monetary, potentially hiring consultants. It's also resource constraints on the staff of the utility as well. So generally, the rate requests are only filed when the utility determines that it actually needs these increased revenues to cover reasonable expenses. And I'll get into what are reasonable expenses later. So on a year-by-year basis, the load, the electric load, kilowatt hours used by all customers, and the power supply costs can vary significantly. And rates are almost never a perfect match to exactly cover the expenses. So in other words, there might be one year where the utility collects a little bit extra money. Instead of just returning it immediately, it can use that to sort of buttress the need for a rate case. And in some cases, if, for example, you collect $30,000 extra, but a rate case is going to cost you $50,000, it doesn't make sense to return it. It makes sense to basically float that $30,000 to the next year. Another aspect as well, municipals and cooperatives maintain what's called a tier requirement times interest earned ratio. In other words, when there's a debt, and most utilities carry some debt on the books, the tier is required, and it's usually required by the lenders to ensure that the utility is basically getting enough revenue to cover the interest on the debt, plus a little bit of a cushion as well to ensure that the debt holders are getting paid. Most recently, in pretty much every single rate case that we've seen, there's three major drivers. Regional transmission costs, and that's ISO New England related transmission costs, so the entire New England grid. Healthcare costs for staff, and then power supply costs. Those seem to be the common denominator among all the rate cases that we've seen.
Yeah, Rip Sebelia.
Excuse me, just, oops, in terms of the transmission costs, those are Vermont's portion of transmission costs in the ISO New England region.
That's correct. Very quickly, the New England grid operates as a grid, and every state essentially pays its share of those costs. Vermont is roughly 4%. I'm sure Commissioner Johnson can tell you with more detail, but it's historically been roughly 4% of the total costs of, last time I looked was a couple of years ago, over $2 billion per year. So, and those transmission costs are increasing every year.
Thank you.
Yep. So really quickly on the process, utility files a rate request. Public Service Department has 30 days to provide a recommendation to the PUC. And then the PUC has 45 days to decide whether to investigate the request. If the PSD recommends an investigation by statute, it's automatic. It's just opened. There's been about 30 rate case investigations since 2021 among all the municipal and cooperative utilities. And sorry, one thing I forgot to put on this slide, when a utility files a rate case, they file notice to their customers of here's what the requested rate increase is, here's how to contact the department, here's how to contact the PUC. So people have a chance to do that. And then if we actually open an investigation, I believe we almost always, if not always, have a public hearing associated with the investigation as well. So I've already talked about contested cases, no ex parte communication, and I'm explaining this a little bit so you can understand the different parties at play here. The PUC, because we're more like a court in this context, all communication is through filings, noticed hearings. I worked for the Department of Public Service for a number of years, including working on a couple of rate cases. That was years ago. The PSD is able to sit down with the utility and just go through the spreadsheet one-on-one. It's PSD, especially with the smaller municipal electric utilities, has a much larger role because they're able to sit down and try to avoid a protracted contested case. They can work out issues behind the scenes and then present it to the PUC for resolution. That often is, I can't speak to now, but historically at one point that was a strategy to avoid heavily contested cases for small municipal electric utilities, because those heavily contested cases increase costs for ratepayers. So the department's role was to try to minimize those costs and act as the public advocate to ensure that the costs were all just and reasonable, and do it. And when I say behind the scenes, I don't mean in a nefarious way. It's just that they were able to do it outside of a contested PUC proceeding. They didn't need to be in a hearing room with all the lawyers and all the witnesses. They could just sit down and have the discussion. So I just want to make clear that there's different roles for the different regulatory bodies here. And the last aspect is, what does a utility file when it files a cost of, or when it files for a rate increase? We call it a cost of service. Essentially, it's a glorified spreadsheet in Excel. Has two different years. The test year, and that is based on audited financials, what the utility spent in that particular year. And then the rate year is in the next, once the rate increase would go into effect, or what the utility is asking to go into effect, here's what the costs are, and here's how those compare to the prior year, the test year. So, for example, transmission costs increase by 3%, 5%, whatever it is. That would show up in the rate year category on the spreadsheet as an increase. Those increases to regional transmission costs are typically known. Usually they're projected at 2 to 3 years in advance, so you understand that. You understand roughly what healthcare costs are doing. So typically the utility presents essentially one set of books, but it has sort of two lines that we're looking at, and we're comparing what are these costs. And the job for the PSD and the PUC is to make sure that these changes are known and measurable and just and reasonable. Known and measurable basically means that you know what the cost is going to be, it's easily measurable, and it's also a reasonable cost for the utility to incur and for ratepayers to pay.
Chair McNamara?
Yeah.
I have a question. So the last slide got to what I was going to ask, and I think this question is for you, sounds like. So my question was going to be broadly, how much insight the PUC gets into the fiscal health of any utility, either through the IRP every 3 years or through a rate case. And so I was specifically wondering about like audited financial statements. So are those only submitted to you if a utility is requesting, if there's a rate case, or are those part of the IRP too? In other words, are those just coming to you guys automatically every 3 years, or does there have to be a rate case?
The audited financials are not typically part of the IRPs. It typically comes in through a rate case. The PUC and also the PSD have broad authority to require information from utilities anytime we want. So we can always just say, we want your latest audited financials, we want your most recent reports, any of that kind of thing. So it's not an automatic that we get the financials every year, but there's a very clear path for obtaining them if needed.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right. Last thing I want to talk about is a change to statute. I think it might have been 5 or 6 years ago. And it allows municipals and co-ops to implement rate increases up to 3% without the full rate setting process. There are limitations to that. Utilities must have had a full rate case in the last 10 years, and this is in the statute. In other words, the utilities can't have been not looked at for so long that we have no clue what's happening with them. All the utilities at this point have come in for full rate increase or full rate cases in the last 5 years. And also that 3% per year cannot exceed more than 10%. So in other words, they can't do 4 years in a row of 3% increases. So there's been 10 rate increases using this simplified process by municipal and co-ops since 2021. And it is not just saying we need 3% and no information. There's still a cost of service required. There's still the audited financial test year, known and measurable rate year, and some narrative explaining what is happening. And the PUC and the PSD both have the opportunity to say, something looks funny, we're going to open a full investigation here. But generally, there's not the need for an order. It tends to be the utilities have tended to use this as if there's a very significant spike and they need some revenues relatively quickly, they can use this and then come in for a full rate increase somewhere down the road. So I believe that's what I have for an overview of the rate process. I'm sorry to fly through it relatively quickly.
No, that's okay. We have a couple questions.
Oh, thank you. Are the fixed charges something that you also review as part of a rate case?
Yes, they are. I'm trying to remember the fixed charges. So there's, I want to make clear there's a difference between a rate case. When I talk about a rate case, what I'm talking about is typically just a simplified rate increase. And this is a utility would come in and say, we need a 5% increase. That's a 5% increase across the board for all customer classes, for all rates. There's also something called rate design. And with rate design, what you do is you look at, there's different classes of customers, for example, commercial, industrial, residential, that's the primary classes. And then the utility would look at, does it still make sense that the commercial customers are paying this amount, residential this amount? Also, does it make sense that the customer charge should be $10 versus $8 versus $15? There's much more involved in changing out the proportions. A rate increase is pretty much what are the costs that the utility is incurring, and do they need an increase in their revenues to cover the costs? That increase then is applied across the board. Did that answer your question, or did that confuse things?
Well, how often does rate design happen, or what triggers it?
There's nothing in particular that triggers rate design. Some of the utilities have started looking into it a little bit more, just given different load characteristics. For example, electric vehicles, changing costs. Rate designs tend to be much less common, and that's in part because the information necessary to inform a rate design is much more significant, and therefore the entire process is much more costly.
One sec. Sorry. Alex? Yeah. Should we be, the little thing has a red light on it. Is that how it's supposed to be?
Then blue.
Rep Campbell just noticed.
Somebody pressed a button on it last night. I can't remember how that happened, but everybody can hear us. And yes, are we on video as well?
Yeah, we wanted to make sure it's okay before we keep going.
We are live streaming.
Okay, and the audio's okay?
Seems
Okay.
like the mayor seems to be able to hear our questions.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Onward we go. Rep Campbell
Yeah.
and then Rep Putner.
Thank you.
Yes. Chairman McNamara, so I'm wondering how closely PUC typically monitor the financial health of the utilities. Did you have any heads up that Hyde Park was in trouble, for example?
I'm trying to stay away from Hyde Park because we do have an open investigation.
Yeah, so I'm not asking
No, no.
specifically about IFAR, but just generally and.
Yep. We generally have a decent understanding of what they have filed, of what utilities have filed with the commission and when they have filed, and generally what is happening. One of the positive aspects of having 17 electric utilities is there's usually a rate case at any given time, so we typically understand the pressures. Most of the utilities have very similar cost pressures. Obviously, there's going to be different issues. Hydro relicensing for a small muni can be a significant cost, for example. But we generally have a understanding of what is happening with all the electric utilities and generally have a sense, as long as the filings are very clear as to what is happening. There's obviously an open question of should we be more proactive in asking? And that is a fair question.
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering is not, obviously, the cost pressures are probably more or less uniform across the state, across the utilities, but how each utility manage those pressures is the other aspect, right? And
Actually, can we pause for 1 second?
oh,
Sure.
looks like we just lost something here. Maybe it's the- check this. Button on the far side is one somebody pushed. I don't know.
Yeah, somebody pushed there's a mic button. Okay,
You know, it's
good.
That's
Thank
good.
you. All set.
I wonder
I don't know.
if we were on recording on this whole thing or not.
Well, it says we're live, but I don't know if there was something going on with the audio. Anyway, barring any
But we seem to.
further information, on we go. Where were we?
Well, but is the chair with us?
Seem to have lost.
Oh, we've lost.
Still here, and I can still hear you.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Okay.
good.
Yeah, don't confuse us.
We're back.
Well,
All right, where were we?
well, so did you hear my last question about the degree to which you're able or the PUC actually does monitor how utilities are managing the cost pressures?
The PUC is able to, as I mentioned earlier, we have authority to require utilities to file information. The question is internal resources necessary to actually be proactive. And that is not always, especially in the last few years, has not been something that we've had lots of extra time to be more proactive.
Okay, thank you.
Rep Bailey.
Commissioner, just wondering, when you get when annual reports are done by auditors on utilities, do you get copies of those? Are they sent to you, your department?
They're not automatically sent to us. I don't believe. I don't believe they're automatically sent to us. If I find out otherwise from staff, I'll let you know. I at least am not reading every utilities annual report as it comes in. It's possible one of my staff is. I don't believe that's the case, though.
Representative Kleppner.
Thank you. Does the PUC, when you're doing rate design, encourage time of use rates, or do you react to those requests as utilities make them?
We generally react to utilities requests as they make them. We did have a workshop. The PUC did hold a workshop several months ago now, because we understood that Green Mountain Power and VEC were in the initial stages of data gathering related to rate design. Vermont Electric Co-op and Green Mountain Power. And so we had a workshop to sit down with the utilities and note that there's a lot of sort of received wisdom. A lot of the folks who have been doing this have been doing it for a very long time, and we actively encourage the utilities to think a little bit more creatively about rate design and to think a little bit more about the best way to achieve different policy goals. Electrification, obviously, maintaining affordable rates. How do you balance all those? And just because the Public Utility Commission had made some determination 30 years ago, it doesn't necessarily mean that it still holds up in today's significantly changed environment. So to answer your question, we don't tell utilities how to design their rates, but we are actively encouraging the utilities to be considering new rate designs, and encouraging the utilities to really work with the department as they're preparing the information. We're still in the process of deciding how proactive we want to be. Historically, the commission has been very passive when it comes to rate design. We simply get a petition at the very end of their study, then they design new rates, and then they file. We're trying to find the right path between, again, directly telling utilities what to do versus being very passive. That we're trying to tread that path by suggesting that they really think about what are the different goals of the state, the policy goals of the state, how to best achieve them, and how to ensure that they're not just recycling the same things that people have been saying for the last 30 years. So that was a very long-winded, rambling question, or rambling answer to your actually concise question. My apologies.
Thank you.
Representative Sibilia.
Chair McNamara, what tools does the commission have if they are worried about the fiscal health of a utility?
So we have the information gathering tool. We have the ability to drag a utility in, have them explain, have them file all the financials, and explain exactly where they are. It's interesting whether I've never seen in a case where we have told a utility you must file a rate increase of X amount. Instead, it is much more a reviewing process of what is your financial health right now? Why aren't you doing anything? You need to move forward on this. If a utility really just decided to not move forward even under that, I'm honestly not sure. I'm sure there's something in there, but it's not something that's come up before.
So specifically, do you have the authority to tell the utility to raise their rates or cut costs?
We have the authority to decide what an appropriate rate increase or rate change would be either way, and that could be a decrease. There have definitely been times when a utility has come in and asked for a 15% increase, and at the end of the day, they ended up getting a 9% increase at the end of the proceeding. In terms of, and I would assume that the opposite is true, that the PUC could require a larger increase than a utility had requested. I'm not sure I've seen that, but I'm guessing it might have happened over the last however many decades.
So, Madam Chair, I actually am pretty interested in this question and what the authority, who has the authority with the utility in terms of the commission and the department. I don't know if we should hear from Ellen, or if I don't know if that's something your attorneys, Chair McNamara, could shed more light on the department.
We can definitely do that. Happy to bring back additional. So I just to make clear, you're interested in the commission's authority to set utilities rates without a request from the utility, or that might be counter to the request of a utility. Am I hearing that correctly?
I believe so. I am specifically interested in what tools the commission has if they see that a utility or assess that a utility is in financial trouble, what tools the PUC has and what they don't. I mean, I think that's important for us to understand.
And I think to follow up, you had talked at the beginning about sort of the underlying motivation for these hearings, and one motivation in the back of my mind, and I don't know the answer to it, which is why one of the reasons we're here, but is to find out whether either PUC or the department needs more tools that we would have to, that you can't get unless we provide them in statute.
Understood. Thank you.
On we go. Are you done?
I am done with the presentation.
Okay.
Sorry, I was waiting for additional questions.
Onward we do not go. Does anybody have any additional questions for Chair McNamara? Okay. Oh, yeah, Representative Howland?
All the utilities are on the same 3-year 2024 IRP. So all utilities file the same year.
No, that they're all on different schedules, and in part there's occasionally the need to push out by a few months the timing of when a utility needs to come in. They might have a very significant issue that they're attempting to resolve that is going to impact their IRP, and so there's not a every year on 2020 or every 2027 and then 2030 we'll have a big rash of them. They tend to be scattered. There's a few of them every year.
Thank you.
Yep. Great.
Thank you, and thanks for your written testimony. Always appreciate it. We'll get that posted.
Thank you very much. And
John?
we'll get some answers back to you.
Great, thank you.
All right. Thanks very much. Bye.
Yeah, feel better.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
For the record.
For the record, my name is Carrick Johnson. I'm Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Public Service. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I thought, given the questions you had kindly provided, Madam Chair, what I thought would be useful, some of it I'll go quickly because the chair addressed it, but I thought what would be useful is first a grounding on what tools, what regulatory processes are in place now.
Madam Chair, may I interrupt? I'm sorry. I'm hearing from folks that are watching the video that there's some audio issues.
Okay.
You can just pause and check.
Sure. Sorry about that. Let's take a break. And figure out if we have an audio issue. Were they more explicit?
Very annoying intermittent buzz coming from the hearing.
Maybe that's why we were muted here.
Commission.
I haven't got.
Is your Vermonter sure it's not their equipment or computer or headphones?
I don't know how much, I don't know. We didn't hear from the chair that there was a problem. So Chair McNamara.
It's not funny. We just
I had somebody check in on it and watch the YouTube stream so far, and they said everything has been recorded and sounds fine.
Okay.
But I can also have somebody come check.
Reporting the news as it's
Reporting
coming
the
today.
news.
Yeah, we could continue. Yeah, Chair McNamara.
Saying, all right. Alex, why don't we keep going, but maybe you can check in with
Yeah, I'm messaging a couple people.
IT. Okay, sorry about that.
It's all right. Just through the buzzing, and this is Eric Johnson, Commissioner of Vermont Department of Public Service. Understanding the precipitating cause and what the committee is looking for, I thought would be the most useful. Would be a little bit of a grounding because Ed did an excellent job. The chair did an excellent job covering some of the statute, which I will touch upon, but a couple more just in the context from my point of view, leading the department, the statutory powers, as well as at least 3 regulatory requirements of utilities that leads to information coming to the department, ultimately that can find its way to the commission, but really comes to the department.
Okay.
The chair is exactly right. We are really the front line that works the most directly, formally and informally, with Vermont's distribution utilities. So statutory provisions, regulatory constructs, including IRP. Then I would like to discuss a utility assessment that we're doing in collaboration with Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. I'll tell you what's going on there and what precipitated that, because it was not the Hyde Park initiative that precipitated that.
Okay.
And then we can get into Hyde Park, and I can share a bit more, given the position I hold. That makes sense in terms of what to cover.
Indubitably.
Okay. All right. So, to be clear, one thing I think Ed touched upon it, and I did confirm this with General Manager Ken Nolan of VIPSA. I'll cut to the punchline here. I don't believe at this current time, there are many things that need to play out. We're in the middle of going through the process with Hyde Park. But based on my career in the various places I've had, and now I'm here, I don't think it's a dearth of regulations or regulatory tools that are lacking here at the department. I think in some case, we'll get into some of the causes and we'll get into that, but that's my punchline that I'm going to tell you. But there's so much more that we need to find out and so much more insights that we need to discover, because we can't even talk about lessons learned while the activity is still going on. So 3 statutory provisions, 3 regulatory practice. 1, we basically can ask for any information we want. So to the degree there's something we're aware of, even if it's soft information, if it's hard knowledge, some kind of information, we can have a request that you need to furnish us this. We don't need to avail. We have not had to avail ourselves of that particular tool. Usually when we ask, the utilities were dutifully provided. So that hasn't necessarily been a problem. One thing that I would note in passing, because there was a question about receipt of audited financials annual reports. The department, as a matter of practice, used to receive annual reports of all utilities. There was a court case because in what was perceived at the time, I think it was Verizon, a telecommunications company, where there was a back and forth. The department was seeking additional answers. This is during Commissioner Tierney's tenure, and Verizon appealed and went to the Vermont Supreme Court. It was deemed that that was an overreach. It was like asking for tax returns, and we could only ask for certain. So effectively, that ended the practice. The department no longer receives annual reports from any distribution utility. We'll get into somehow we're seeking to rectify that, but that was the state of play for the last, I want to say 4 years, 6 years, something like that, since that decision.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a pretty big difference between Verizon and our utility.
Oh, I got it. They all are regulated by the Vermont Public Service Department, or excuse me, have regulations to a certain degree. And further, this was the powers of the department to compel provision of these materials. That's the common denominator. And we're told, no, only under explicit circumstances and through a much more involved process. Happy to provide you more, because this is something that I had general knowledge about. I've become more aware about it. So that's 30 VSA in, Madam Chair. I'll provide this. Sorry I didn't get you before, but I'll provide after.
Okay.
30 VSA section 206. Ed mentioned this. That's the part where we can ask for what we want. Second is overall regulation, that kind of the full panoply. That's 30 VSA section 209. That sets the jurisdictional limits, what the commission does, what the public service department does, the kind of who does what in terms of regulation with regards to utilities. Third is section 231, again, 30 VSA section 231. That's a certificate of public good. Who gets to be a utility and granted a service territory? It's under those provisions that happen. One thing I would respond to the question, okay, what are the tools, what you can do? Presumably with sufficient motivation, if you actually thought it was in the best interest of ratepayers of some utility, you could actually revoke a certificate of public good for a given utility. Vermont in its past has come close to that. Well, but typically what happened, it was in the case of a company called Citizens Utilities, it was essentially forced out and said, you will sell, or we're just going to revoke it and you'll have no asset to sell.
Did the department do that or the?
It was combination.
Okay.
Combination. But my point is, there is broad latitude if there's bad actors or something that needs to be done to protect Vermont ratepayers. Yeah.
Just clarifying, citizen, when was that approximately? I mean, it's
Honestly, ever since COVID, my time frame, like exactly what year happened, well, I don't know. I can find out. I'm sorry.
In the 1990.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, it's there.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. So those are the three major, and I think very comprehensive regulatory, statutory provisions and powers that the department has. The three regulatory tools, one, and the chair didn't touch upon this, and that's service quality reliability. SQRPs in the province. Every utility has a service quality reliability, covers 7 broad areas: billing, customer service, phone answering, billing, meter reading, work completion, customer satisfaction, worker safety, and overall reliability of service. Every utility has one. There's some similarities, but they're tailored per utility, because given your reliability requirements, you may have a very rural service territory. It acknowledges, because each utility has maybe a bit of a different capital structure, a different service territory. There's I guess I'll call them nuances. There's different underlying factors that help inform what standard they should be held to. And they're held to it. And there's at least one financial penalty if you fail to deliver, and they're held accountable. These are reported quarterly. So we have a sense of what's going on in the ability of utilities to serve. Are they failing? And these are, again, reported quarterly, so that it gets a good vision into what's going on.
Rep Campbell.
So on the one hand, you said that the department does not receive annual financials or sort of regular financial information, but then you're just saying that you do have a good window into the financial health of utilities because you receive. I forget what it is.
No, that's not here's what I said to represent. I'm sorry, I didn't want to.
No. That's what I'm trying to understand. What am I missing? What did I miss?
What I didn't make clear enough is that you can draw inferences if reliability is failing. Typically, what's happening? You're not keeping your system up. If you're not keeping your system up, what's going on? What's going on with personnel? Are you lacking cash to be able to put the investments that you need to in the grid to maintain system reliability?
That's what you hear about quarterly. Is the system
all of the service 7 areas? It's up to 17, but there's. Yes, they're reported. Each utility reports them quarterly.
Okay, so that basically quality of service. Maybe we.
Hence the name.
Oh,
well, service quality reliability. Yes.
Okay.
No,
but the real question is, well, and you'll get to it, I'm sure, but who and how are we monitoring the health of our distribution utilities, and who should be doing that? And that's the general question. You don't have to answer right now.
You asked the general. Let me give you a general answer, if I may, please. What I would say is, I went back and looked, and most Vermont utilities were incorporated, say, in the 1890s, 1900, 1910 timeframe. We've had as many as 47, maybe 52 utilities, and now we're down to 17. There's been thousands of rate cases and things that have happened for utility. This issue with Hyde Park is the first time an issue like this has happened. So I just want, in terms of setting context, and where are we, right? One is an off. If there was 2 or we have a trend, at least in my judgment, subject to further verification, this doesn't constitute a trend. And I'll give you my opinion, reasonably informed, on what happened in the case of Hyde Park. But I guess, Madam Chair, and the committee here, from the department's point of view, maybe the most important thing to say is local distribution utilities remain the most effective way to deliver cost-effective service. Two, do I think that there could be efficiencies secured? Yes, I have never been one to advocate consolidation, but I have made it and consistently said, including to the Board of Trustees and the leadership of Hyde Park, you need to collaborate better. I know firsthand about the inefficiencies in the existing grid. Some of that is personality and fiefdoms. Some of that is operational lack of knowledge. There's a continuum of how utilities are managed. There's really effective people, and there's people who are less effective, as we have seen. So in my view, in our department, the way the department sees this is continue the best strategy to ensure cost-effective, reliable service delivery to Vermonters is to first help the local utilities survive. And then if they are deemed, for whatever reason, lack of way, incompetent or unworthy, then we find and move through and come up with another strategy. In this particular case, which we're still learning about, it's against that kind of backdrop. So this is a one-off case. I don't know. So I'm giving you a general answer. So I'll stop there. So that's what I would say.
Okay.
We
Yes.
no, I'm not. No, but go ahead. I'm happy to.
Were you done answering?
Yes.
Okay. So just broadly,
Yeah.
the SQ.
Service quality reliability.
Just broadly, what's the process for reviewing those by the department?
They are sent, and we have our customer advisory. I'm sorry.
Kathy?
Yes, and they review and they say, okay, this is a problem, and we work with the utility to decide. Let's say they failed, or there's a customer satisfaction is down. We have the conversation. Well, what happened here? And they'll give an explanation. And that has been, because obviously I knew I was going to be asked. Those have been very healthy discussions. And typically, I will say the utilities are very responsive. That's why Hyde Park sticks out so much. Yeah. Utilities have been very responsive to it. Now, do they have a financial incentive to do so? Yes, they do. Are they challenged? And there's a whole thing we can get into, given more frequent extreme storms and how that's accounted for versus what you're accounting for in your service quality reliability plans. And I think there's room for efficiencies in reconciling that. But fundamentally, that is an effective living process.
Mm-hmm. So they're somebody's job to review those.
Yes, it is.
And when they review them, does the
yes,
commissioner then get a report?
Yes. My thing is, even beyond the SQRPs, what I seek to do is get a report every month. What are people complaining about?
Okay. Thank you.
All right. The third, so.
We have another question.
Sure.
Representative Clinton.
I'm sorry, can you educate me a little, I know it's an uphill struggle.
That was on
but the utilities issue annual reports. Is that true?
Some do, some don't.
Some do, some don't. And that's separate from audited financials.
In some cases.
In some cases. And the ones who do issue annual reports, are those public documents?
They have to be if for municipal utilities, yes. Well,
Yeah.
they must be for all of them. Right, because if you're investor owned, you have to provide.
Which means you can get the annual report.
Right.
Those who issue them, you can get them. I mean,
Right.
you said we don't get them anymore.
Well, what I said was, as a matter of practice, we don't get them anymore. And it used to compel, hey, where's your annual report? You haven't sent it yet.
Yeah.
Secondly, like as the chair mentioned, the era in which we had someone dedicated who did nothing but read those reports. I remember working with her well, the previous life. That whole area of the Department of Public Service is gone. There's one person who did, there's 3 other people whose job it was to do some of that work. Those people are gone. Mm-hmm. So, and we'll get to some other things we're gonna, in some cases, you'd say a restart. And in some cases, kind of being more effective in the information. And I guess what I would say at this point is, I'm very mindful of don't precipitate that which you're trying to protect against.
Mm.
There are significant regulatory requirements on utilities, significant, and the world's getting more complicated, and it's harder to run those utilities. My team's incredibly busy. So I am making sure, because of both of those factors, how efficient are we in the information in the, what are we asking for and why, and what are we going to do with it?
Yeah.
Candidly, I think we could do a better job in exactly what we asked for and how we manage it. And we're pursuing at least one particular project to be able to better address that. Because we're stuck, speaking of the 90s, we're stuck in the 90s with some of the data management tools that we have in place. So we're going to try and do that. So I guess my point is, and on the other side, when I first started, now that was a year ago, there was, at least in some cases, where I felt that some of the people we regulate weren't as responsive, weren't as respectful as they needed to be to our department. It wasn't any of the municipal utilities, but it was some of the other people we regulate. And so we had to affect behavioral change, which we have done. So I see this, because having said all I've said, what I will say is, Hyde Park is what I hope, it's an extreme case, but arguably it's a harbinger. And what is happening out there, and this will get to why I started, and we'll get kind of jumping around. And so I apologize for that.
So let's go quick follow-up. So having written annual reports, I know that they tell the story that whoever writes them wants to tell. So, like, it doesn't feel to me a huge loss of information not to get the annual reports. The audited financials, on the other hand, are important. And as I've mentioned before on the subject of regulatory burden, easy tech to have those come to you automatically.
I could not agree with you more strongly. I'll just note here, it's almost like in the interest of full disclosure. For about 6 years, I wrote the annual report for CBPS, so I know all about the story that you have to work with. Then the story you tell. Now it has to, there has to be truth there. The 10K though, that comprises, right? There's two parts that comprise an annual report. You have the story, and then you have the straight up financials that the Wall Street investment types and your shareholders are looking for.
Yeah.
And that has real information.
Yes.
For the publicly traded folks. Okay. One thing on IRPs, and I should have thought of this, Madam Chair, but I will follow up and do this, is provide, I think it would be good for this committee to see an example of the SQRP and see an example of an integrated, the questions we ask in an integrated resource plan.
That'd be great.
Yeah. The third thing I was but Ed did such a good job on rate cases. We know about rate cases and you explored that. Ed did a better job. Chair did a better job than I would have. Where I want to go with the IRPs is the next, to talk about the utility assessment that the department is going to conduct of every utility in the state of Vermont. Now, for some, that will mean much more exploration and data information sharing, because we don't have the full picture like we do bluntly for a Green Mountain Power. That isn't that we have everything, but the list of things that's missing is a heck of a lot smaller than with some of the municipal utilities. Honestly, my team hasn't met with some of these utilities in years. The members of our team has changed, the members who's managing these utilities, and Vermont's too small to not have that kind of build up that trust, have that relationship, being able just to reach out and get the information. So we're going to be doing that, but I see you have a question.
Is that sort of a new comprehensive process that you're undertaking? Like, you're new or ish, I guess, and not to the scene, but did you proactively decide,
Yeah.
You know what, we need to check in with every single utility, and did that come before Hyde Park or after Hyde Park?
Before. So thank you for the question. So what happened was, as part of Governor Scott's, there's this event called Capital for a Day, and you go into a different county, and each of the members of the cabinet do this stuff that they do. So I did what I did, and I met with a utility, and I can, the vibe I got, there was information, and I dutifully wrote it down. But you get a sense when you're in an office, this is the power of being in person, ascension. And just something felt, this doesn't feel like sustainable. This worries me, in your gut. This worries me. So I talked to my team, and then candidly, I reached out to Ken Nolan, general manager of VIPSA, and I said, I'm concerned. I think what we need to do now, here's the new regulator saying, I'm coming here and I want to launch a whole new assessment. So of course, that led to some robust discussions about what that might look like. However, I want to say that Ken and VIPSA the leadership team was incredibly constructive. So we began iterating. I had the ball, and I took a long time, like 2 or 3 months, to figure out what exactly do we ask. And that's why I think of it for the committee. I needed to learn exactly the questions we're asking of utilities through SQRPs. What are we asking of them in the IRPs? What is the picture where we should be able to piece together, and what's missing? After reviewing this, that led to the schedule of questions that General Manager Nolan and I have been iterating, and we are now effectively done on that. The idea is, and I have language, but I can give you the objective and the like. The idea is to have the conversation with 3 utilities, look at 3 dimensions. One is their financial status. Getting clarity on their financial status, hearing directly, seeing the information, and talking to the people managing the books and the like. 2 is their operational kind of take. Do they know their grid? Do they have a sense of their trouble spot? Do they have a plan for capital investment to address those trouble spots? Because you can get a sense of how someone knows their plant out in the field and what's going on there. And then thirdly is people. How are they doing? Do they have long-standing vacancies? Do they have imminent retirements? Do they have a succession plan? Are the crews working safely? Or are they being stressed and overtime, and they're a little bit older and they're put in positions that they shouldn't be being put in? Those are the 3 dimensions. That's what we agreed that we would concentrate on. We have now a set of questions. This will be new, but what General Manager Nolan and I have tentatively agreed to, or not tentatively, but what we've agreed to is we would try and I think it's get the interviews done in person, the order of which, because that's seemingly the thing, the order of which will decide, and to be done by June 30th with a final and then review, and no later than October 1st have okay, here's what we have learned. So that is that utility assessment that we're embarking upon.
And that's every utility, or are you starting with the VIPSA members?
Starting with the VIPSA members.
Okay.
Again, because that's where we're the most blind. And also, we are informed, I am informed by what happened with Hyde Park, a small municipal. And if you look at the profile, okay, what are the stressors for this utility? One, you don't have just a couple words of that because I think it's important. Ed touched on a couple, and he's exactly right, like what's showing up tactically in rate cases, say, for the last year and a half. But what are the larger the context, at least in our judgment, in my judgment, what's happening? One is rising costs for wholesale energy, materials, and regional transmission services. I'd give you a flavor of that, but the costs there are significant. And that is cyclical. And we're now in a cycle where it's going to go up. And what's new is now there is much, it was about 30 years ago or so when there's a spate of transmission that was built. There was the new federal reliability standards because of the blackout that hit years ago. The new federal reporting standards became effective June of 2007. Those in turn spawned a whole lot of new transmission being built, including Vermont, which hadn't built anything for like 25 years in transmission. All that means the region, and since we're all joined at the wallet, there's a whole lot of asset condition, okay, we got to replace this. But what's happening is because more and more people want to decarbonize and shift more usage of the grid, we're not building same for same. We're building bigger, costlier at a time of tariffs, including on aluminum and steel and other material that go into the grid. Some of the key companies and providers are in Canada, as well as some of the Nordic companies. And the tariff map is incredibly difficult to navigate, which is also taking place at a time now where data center hunger for power is exacerbating supply constraints. in addition to supply chain woes that continue to this day, fits and starts since COVID and the things you experienced there. So that's just cost of the stuff that's going on.
Yeah, just a little more fine tune on Chair's question.
Yeah.
So I heard VIPSA members only for at this point. Are we going to be doing all of the utilities though, so that we have the ability?
Yes.
And do you have a timetable for that?
Well, the idea would, I thought that candidly, by October 1st, everything done.
Like all of the utilities, not just the munis.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's easier. It'll be easier. Like with Green Mountain Power, we're going to be in the midst of a comprehensive rate case anyway, right?
Yeah.
So we'll have.
So you just be asking all the utilities
Yeah.
consistent questions.
Correct.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome. But also, I think it's important to note that the customers that local utilities are serving, like all the customers in Vermont, their needs are evolving. I think the tolerance, one, for outages and not being able to charge your phone, not being able to access to computer, let alone electric vehicles, the batteries, the appetite and the demands, the expectations of customers have grown. And so serving now, you're not serving the same where, okay, we're going to be out for a day and a half or 2 days. That doesn't fly. I mean, it still happens once in a while, but that really doesn't fly. So you have more costs, you have rising customer demand. We've already talked about aging infrastructure, and you have those costs at the same time as these other rising power supply costs, all at a time when property tax are raising. So the munis are uniquely stressed because small rate or customer base over which can spread and these multiple stacking of costs that are happening. I would also say regulatory requirements. Some of the new stuff that wasn't back in the day is now cybersecurity, and cybersecurity. This is one thing I wish, once you know, and
Wish you didn't know.
well, I'm glad I do, but
No.
it is deadly serious.
Yeah.
And the one takeaway I'll give you so I can share this concern is that the assumption now by the law enforcement, but I know that can be a freighted term. What I would say is people who have great knowledge and people I trust because someone I trust them. And when they tell you, here's the state of play, it is assumed now that there are bad actors who are already in every utility operating system. It's just the question of when they choose to act. I'm not saying they're all behind the firewall. I'm just saying they're there lurking. So what I learned is extreme weather events are the perfect opportunity to couple that with a cyber attack. So municipal utilities, these people have to guard against this, right? It's the weakest link that you're going to go to be successful. So all the tools for protecting against data incursion, the training you have to do for your team to not sign in or click a link on a phishing email and like all that has to happen for this at the same level for the municipal utility.
So just not to go veering off on this, but does the department have any plans about? So that's pretty serious.
It is.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yes.
We have a responsibility ourselves, as do you, to the public. Have you been talking about, in the midst of all of this other work that you're doing, how to help Vermonters prepare for what is likely an inevitability there?
Here's what I would say. First, what I have time and power to do is first educate our team and the people most engaged at the utility level.
And I don't want to take us too far.
No, it's going to be quick. So I came for this event in Boston, grabbed some people. And so now what we're doing is, and pitched it to the utility and emergency management and other people. So now we are takes working forever, but we are now organizing an event precisely to talk about that dual combined threat. So the people you would look to, what are we supposed to do? Tell me, like, where's the emergency shelter? Like, we're going to have that and run through that, just as we learned in Boston, to try and educate the people to get that done, because you're right. It's a big deal. So that, and we actually funny, but the next thing is these more frequent extreme weather events. There's incredible collaboration there. that handles among the utilities, both the investor owned, municipal utilities, New England wide and beyond. There is digital tools, there's relationships established. That's one thing I have to say, like utilities, generally speaking, get right. When there's an emergency, it's all hands on deck. How can we help each other? That really works. But the frequency of when they're having to do that continues to rise, and the severity of the storms that are hitting, they're more severe. And if you think of the assets now that are in the field, communication assets are just as important, like to keeping your vision system, which wasn't as much of a thing, but previously, now it's a thing. So it's another asset in the field that you have to be mindful of and take provision for. So that's it. Just one data point I learned. Vermont is 4th in the nation in terms of per capita costs for these disasters, $902. 4th in the nation. Washington County, who knew, in Vermont is one of the most frequently costliest hit counties anywhere in the nation. Yeah. So that's another factor that what's on the plate for these small utilities to have to manage, all utilities are having to manage. Lastly, what I would say is back to and why we need to explore it is personnel retention and recruitment. There's a whole cadre of people who work their butts off, didn't matter the time of day or weather, clean up a pole, do the stuff they need to do. And there's a whole generation that continues. The utility industry nationwide, and certainly in Vermont, given our demographics, are aging out. And where you get the people to actually backfill those, that continues to be a challenge. There's a lot of cannibalization among the Vermont utilities where some companies train and, oh, you just train that person, we'll take them here and pay them a little bit more. So it's a very, very competitive. It's hard to find people that the utilities need to do it. So I just want to run through when you're saying we have tools in place. It's good to be knowledgeable of the pressures that they're under. Having said that, they have a job to do, right? Run the utility. So I've already told you about the assessment. Perhaps it would be good to talk specifically about Hyde Park.
Yeah.
Let me make sure because so here I want to credit. I was sent an email. There was the first true signal I had was on September 3rd, an email from Efficiency Vermont saying, hey, just want you to know, Hyde Park has now, we've been trying to work with them, Commissioner, but they are really behind and now not answering our phone calls or emails. They're not remitting to us the dollars collected from their customers, which by statute, they are supposed to convey to Efficiency Vermont. I have never heard of that ever happening in my life. So to me, I saw the email, I got like 2:37, 3 p.m. Gathered my staff. This is bad. And I checked myself and made one call. Look, this is, oh, hell yes. Has this ever happened? Remember, I'm a year in. Has this ever happened before? No. Okay. So your instincts are good. So launched. So September through that, on September 4th, I got the then general manager. We had a tough conversation. Directed them for an in-person meeting. They asked for a few days to put their materials together. I gave them 4. So we met in person on September 9th. Tough meeting. It was a tough meeting. The outcome, though, of which was you own this. Here, you will file immediately with the Public Utility Commission. Here's what we've done. Here's the situation we're in. Tell them everything. That's all you got now. That letter was sent on September 29th. They filed that letter.
So, can I just, sorry.
Yeah.
You're telling them to file with the PUC because the PUC holds their CPG,
because the CPG determines what they can charge for rates. Look,
that's allowing them to operate in the state.
Yeah.
So that's why you're sending them.
Yes. And thank you for saying it, because my response to your question would also be, remember, at this particular time, but there was smoke, right?
Mhm.
And you see a little flame.
Mhm.
He had no idea. That's a poor metaphor. There's a little bit of water. I had no idea how deep, like how broad the problem, how deep was this problem. So when we had the conversation, it was tough because defensive, not taking in, it was incredible actually, what was going on, but that told me there's even more.
Mhm.
So file and do everything. And I start to reach out. For instance, I reached out to Velco. Hey, is Hyde Park paying you the stuff they need to pay? No. Oh, well, they are behind. Well, okay. How far? Hey, efficiency wrong. Exactly how far are they behind? So we started thinking, what else? Of course, I have no sense of the individual vendors they're working with in Hyde Park, but I know as a utility, their responsibility. Everyone had red lights. So the idea was, what's the quickest way to initiate the process for a full review with all the panoply of tools that would then be at the disposal? That's why we had to make the PUC aware. I will tell you, as I told directly the Hyde Park leadership, the chair of the board of trustees and the general manager, for right now, based on what I know right today, this is a pilot stuff you created. But as I see it right now, the most effective way to protect ratepayers is to see how we'll figure out how bad you are, restore you to financial solvency. Phase 1. Just get them so they're not bleeding anymore, and by bleeding, I mean, if they're not paying their debts, then there's penalties and there's late fees and it starts to add up. So what ultimately ratepayers they have to pay is more than if we try and at least triage it, restore them to some kind of financial solvency. That's the purpose of phase 1, which is what we're in right now. Phase 2 is the full reckoning. Or I should say the partial reckoning, because there's going to be a comprehensive review, everything. And there has been things discovered from that first filing on September 29th. There was more. So that phase 2 is everything's on the table. Here's effectively a workout plan, how we could do it. It is almost inevitable that there's going to be an ask for special treatment for Hyde Park to incorporate in rates expenses and loans and financial instruments that heretofore have not been allowed to be incorporated into rates.
Special request made of the PUC.
Correct. They're going to have to, if that entity is to avoid, in my opinion, this is my opinion, bankruptcy. And I want this community to know, I explored, and I've been through this before in the 90s over restructuring and the advocacy at the time for bankrupting CVPS and Green Mountain Power as a way to get out of the Hydro-Quebec contract, and that would be good for ratepayers. If you don't know, that was active discussion. And I reached out at that time, to a bankruptcy lawyer and worked with him. And let me just tell you, there's nothing good about bankruptcy. Nothing, especially in the utility business. But my team, I felt it's important for us. We have to at least explore the option. In this instance, what it looks like, you bankrupt the utility, effectively what you're doing is bankrupting the village. And I don't think either of those things, ultimately, my lane is worried about electric ratepayer, but obviously going to be aware of the broader impacts of the strategy we pursue. So there's going to come a time in phase 2, exactly what makes sense to do. And how should these ratepayers currently served by Hyde Park Electric Department, should that in fact be the model by which they're served? In my judgment, that is an open question as to whether or not that should continue to be an ongoing entity.
So is it your sense that it will be the Hyde Park ratepayers that will be on the hook? Will Vermont taxpayers also be on the hook? Do you have a sense of this yet?
Good question. Clearly the Hyde Park ratepayers will be on the hook. And there may be other, broadly speaking, because of other interconnection points, you could see where other electric ratepayers across Vermont could be impacted. There may be a taxpayer consequences, but that's why it's tough to say, what tools do you need? Because we don't even really have, I don't have, it hasn't been filed. No one really yet has. Here's the clear picture and how it might be resolved, and thus who has to pay. So there's financial institutions involved. How can they help to mitigate or save the, change the terms, the cadence of whatever financial instruments are placed, understanding the situation this is in, right? These are Vermont institutions. They entered into it. And I think this was a case of, we had our flashlight into Hyde Park operations. Also, I heard stuff, which is why, in fairness, the general manager of Hyde Park reached out to me and said, hey, I hear you're meeting with the distribution utilities. Would love it if you'd come talk to us. I said, are you kidding me? Would love to be there. And I could not have been more candid in that meeting. I don't like the signals I'm getting. You need to collaborate and join with either, you pick who. But I don't think you're gonna be able to make it long term. I didn't know what was going on, but you're gonna be able to make it long term on your own like this. Join VIPSA or join some other group. There's other things you can do. You guys are gonna need help. And I got that because I was picking up, this is Vermont. Yeah, there's some weird requests. They're asking this, but Hyde Park started to really make requests during storms. They weren't giving anything to the table. They were only asking. And then they started asking for general operations, not just storms. That's another thing that they know that there were problems. The one thing I do think it's important that I also want to share though, the depth of this problem and the length of time over which it festered tells me we could have done a better job.
We is who?
The Public Service Department. We could have done a better job. And in fact, there was a customer who called who said, hey, I'm a little bit concerned. Now, the team did it, had two half-an-hour phone calls to run through and did stuff. And by the letter of the law, they did exactly what they were supposed to do. It's easy for me to say this, right, because it's retrospect, but I think those of you who know me, I would have likely taken a bit more of an expansive view. Okay, hey, and then call, well, what, this is concerned. What do we do? For whatever reason, that didn't happen. So my point is, we're not just pointing at others. Having looked at that and thought critically about the information we get, if you have the stars of this production, if we're way down on the credit list, way down as someone that has some measure of culpability, I think we could have done a bit better. But make no mistake, we got here, and in the situation we are through a series of intentional decisions over a period of time where the officials running that utility were less than forthcoming. There was measures taken to hide certain things from certain venues, or certainly not share to give the full picture. Acts of omission that were done. And so it's no wonder then that various people who had just one view into one thing on this didn't have the totality of the picture, and that didn't really, the tipping point came when that email from Efficiency Vermont said they're not remitting their revenues.
So I would just note, Commissioner, that sadly, you probably will not be commissioner for all time. And so we need to make sure that we're leaving processes behind so that are able to adjust with whomever is in the office. And I would also say for myself, just to flag, if we have other ratepayers or Vermont taxpayers involved here, for me, that starts to rise up to, it's just, I don't know enough. So just more curiosity about how our Vermont taxpayers and ratepayers in general being protected around the monitoring of the health of these utilities. And I think you're doing a great job explaining to us. It's very helpful to where we are.
I had a question and then
If I may, Madam Chair, I just want to respond. Just two things. One, from day one, I have been mindful of the brevity of my tenure. So it's like going into a park, right? You leave it better than you found. So first has been restoring the team, camaraderie, the connective tissue about the message and the esprit de corps and the like. Two has been, again, the tools we have to receive and process and distill insights from the information we have. And that's in place. And that will outlast certainly me. So the team will have better tools. Secondly, what I would say is, as the insights, as the lessons learned, and we see what mistakes were made, I may come back to you and say, you know what? Here's this one, and maybe it can be a regulatory fix, or maybe it's a statutory. In the cases where, in the rare cases where this happens, this is the one thing. But I'm not sure that is going to happen, but it may. So I take your point on notice on that. Sorry, Madam Chair.
I'm going to put myself at the back of the line. Rep Southworth, then Morrow, then Kleckner.
Generally speaking,
Yeah.
Don't need specifics. Have you been able to identify the root cause of what started the downhill slope into the pond?
That's a great question, and let me respond with a bit of process. So this is a two-phase rate case or kind of proceeding here. Phase one is restore financial solvency to the best, just so monies are coming in. And I think now, as I've learned from General Manager Nolan, yes, I think the monies are just starting to come in. So that means a rate increase for Hyde Park ratepayers, but less than what they otherwise would have had to experience. And now you can start rationally and rationalizing costs and operational costs and with revenue. So that's phase one. Phase two will be that, okay, here's everything that happened. Here's what we think we can do to fix it sustainably. This institution agreed to rework these particular loans this way. It's all part of a package. Ultimately, this is what it all resolved to. All that work, phase one to phase two to what the investigation, as the chair mentioned, it's the precise reason that the sentence to open the investigation was, we're going to examine and determine root causes and remedies, essentially. So the idea is now, do our homework, continue to understand. Here again, VIPSA has been doing incredible work, partnering with the department and stepping up, both in terms of the leadership, Ken and his team, and the board, to do incredible work to help. This is where, this happened. And it's never happened in our history before. But the Vermont-like response of collaboration, what do we do here, especially between my department of people, Ken, with lawyers and consultants, and it could have been messy. And it still might be messy ultimately, depending on if there's any civil litigation. I don't know what's going to happen ultimately, because people sign stuff that asserts what they knew or didn't know. So all that is yet to work out, but it will be under the auspices of the PUC investigation that will say this, through that investigation, it will determine exactly what you're asking.
And along with that, after that's identified, my assumption is there'll be remedies in place that will hopefully red flag this before it gets to this point again for any other utility that would run into something like this.
It's a great point to note that part of over the root cause and remedies might be just as the colloquy where it just happened. Is there some regulatory or statutory hole that would be good to fill such that we could avoid some? Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Rep Morrow?
I apologize if you already mentioned this, but are utilities required to file audited financial statements on an annual basis?
No.
Why not?
There was a court case where the department was requesting information in that instance. In that immediate instance, it was a telecommunications company, but it had broad impact, which meant that those audit financials are like tax returns, and the department could broadly compel that you have to send it. You would only be able to do that if it was very narrowly focused for a specific reason. Now, look, be skeptical all you want. That's the state of legal play when I entered. And as I said to the committee, I'm happy to learn more about it because I've explored it in bits and pieces. And so happy to share more about it with you. What I didn't get into, Madam Chair, in response to your question is, the other thing that General Manager Nolan and I negotiated is what information is to be provided. And it includes, not surprisingly, it includes those documents. And candidly, I also learned about a financial reporting creature I had never heard of before, which are 315, 115
letters.
115 letters, which is a letter from the auditor, which goes to, I'm going to put it this, whoever paid them to actually undertake the audit. No one in my department knew that those existed. Those are what seemingly, at least in this instance, that's where the real candid stuff gets articulated. And now we have them. Now we know enough to ask about them. But that was something that even when the court, I'm not sure our department ever, one, knew about, or two, ever asked for. But collaboratively, again, in partnership with VEPSA, we'll start with the municipal utilities, but now we even have a better sense of what precisely to ask. And VEPSA has agreed, working with its members, to provide that information. And that's important, and it's very helpful. That answers.
Well, you can only ask for it if they do it or have done it.
Well,
right? So they're not required to do it because of this Supreme Court law. How many of the VIPSA members, for instance, are auditing their financials every year?
Certainly, I would defer to General Manager Nolan, but I believe as a matter of public management, all of them are audited every year.
Okay, great.
That's what I see. But that's right.
But not Hyde Park.
No, Hyde Park, to be clear, Hyde Park was audited. And when this happened, oh, there's a whole, there was a series of audits that we became aware of. And that's when we became aware of these letters that where the candid stuff was exchanged. And all this arrived, email from EBT, started all this sort of happen. And that audit for the 2025 financials had not yet been closed. So it was still open. And that led to some, that led to quite a robust discussion of back and forth and exactly. So it was a mess. We're going to find out exactly. We'll do some kind of workout plan to get to a sustainable outcome, which may or may not involve the continued existence of Hyde Park Electric Department. And then we'll go to root causes. And that might be, all right, here's the things that need to be solved. You're welcome.
So to Rep. Southward's question about what was the first step that started sliding towards the pond, I'm going to venture a prediction that, as Hemingway described a man going into bankruptcy, he went first gradually and then suddenly.
I know that line. It's a great. I would say this. First of all, there was a tragedy involved in all this. So, or at least the sad. The previous general manager became ill and passed away, and then then you have the existing. The subsequent general manager. There was a decision made. Well, here's what I would say. Here's what I would respond. And again, please caveat, but this is my take right now, knowing what I understand, the full trail will be coming, is that there was a big decision made to enter into an incredibly large solar project that required loans, and it was a big deal. I actually went to the ribbon cutting and the like for Little Hyde Park. Okay, this was a huge financial and operational commitment. It sucked up a lot of the capacity for that system. It sucked up a lot of financial capacity and operational grid capacity for that system. And then there was gyrations made. So I would say if I had to pick one thing that started, still not fully versed in all the things that might have happened, I would say that lingering almost albatross of the thing that hampered options, required loans and loan servicing to be able to handle that, meant that there wasn't a whole lot of capacity for the other things that happened. Then you have a change in leadership. And then you have the strengths and weaknesses of the leaders in that village, of that utility, and how they decided to make decisions, affect change, policies they pursued, and how they chose to manage ratepayer dollars that led to these consequences.
Bailey, are you a customer of Hyde Park Electric?
Oh, yeah.
Would you share what the experience of a customer was like during this period of time?
Well, it didn't affect me any. My power was there every day.
Okay, so stayed reliable and
And
everything.
I always paid 3 months in advance on my electric bill. Not that I even knew they had a problem.
Yeah, thank you.
The other thing, Madam Chair, what almost keying off of that is that I do also have to thank Scott Johnstone for stepping in with VIPSA and the contractual arrangements made to really calm the water, steady the ship, and bring some more effective management of the organization. I'm also aware that Ken and Scott have held a series of informational meetings with customers, which is exactly what we wanted to have happen. So those have been going forward. So my point is, in terms of seeking to share with customers, what can be shared, because just like with the chair talking about, okay, now it's a contested case proceeding, there could be the prospect of litigation. There's some things you can't share. But in terms of the effort to communicate what can be done, I think they've really done a good job in providing to customers, to the body politic, here's what's going on, here's the next steps, here's what we need to do. And I'm grateful for that.
I don't know whether my question is best put to you or to VIPSA, because I'm aware that Hyde Park wasn't a VIPSA member. But one thing I don't understand with our municipal utilities is the role of like the local select board. And, if a muni wants to raise their rates, does the select board have to approve that? Because that seems thin ice to me, and just in terms of expertise and political dynamics and weirdness. And then, and I was curious too, then about the role that our select boards would be required or asked or expected to play in providing fiscal oversight for a business that they might know zero about.
Two things I would say, and this is a perfect segue, unless there's other questions, Madam Chair, for me to exit. But I would say this. One, the same factors I talked about they're on the shoulders and affect the management by utility staff themselves. Cyber attack, rising customer expectations. One thing I didn't talk about is more sophisticated digital tools now, which I'm also pushing for to more effectively get more value out of the grid. Well, that makes serving as a trustee or on the board, there's a commensurate amount of burden and a requirement for additional training, for additional knowledge on the part of the people who are, right? No good deed goes unpunished. If you're going to volunteer to do that, like what you're actually stepping into, and to your point, Madam Chair, and having to do, it's not perfunctory as it used to be. Last point is, that was why I urged the village trustees in Hyde Park to join with VIPSA. I was very upfront. Here's what I'm hearing. I didn't know any of that. This was in March. And it was, like I said, September before this stuff that happened. So, but General Manager Nolan is the better person than me to answer that question.
Great. That's been one of my burning questions coming into this whole thing. So, Commissioner, sure.
Well, just to clarify, in this case, it's a village entity, so it's the village trustees. The select board has nothing to do with it.
Okay.
They're outside generally the village trustees are the commissioners for the water and life department. Both, that is same in the Marshall Water and Light as it is. And that's why we've never merged the town, because the town didn't ever want to take on the debt of utility. So that's why we still got two government entities. Side by.
Thank you. Commissioner Johnson, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Is that written testimony that you're going to be submitting?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, it was like, no, I said at the outset that I would share that. So I just want to be clear. So one, I owe you this, which I'll send
Alex, yeah.
to Alex, yes?
And then two, what I'll also include is an SQRP example
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well as an IRP, because I think it would, when General Manager Nolan, when I was looking, what questions do I want us to ask for the utility assessment? I looked at the IRP and said, oh my God, there's a lot of financial questions we're already asking as part of the IRP, a lot of, which you'll see. So I'll provide those three documents.
Great. Thank you so
Okay.
much for your time.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Commissioner.
All righty.
I don't want to stay.
You really don't want to hear what I say, Chair.
I'm sure. I just want to note. Like, so I will.
All
Getting
right.
up a meeting in about 15 minutes. I
Right.
apologize.
Okay.
Great. So, Alex, I don't know if it's better for me to share a screen or have you put my presentation up.
You can do it. That would be best.
So for the record, Ken Nolan, I'm the General Manager of Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. I've got a few slides that I sent Alex last night that I'll try to share here. If I can. And I just put together a few slides, starting from a high level, like community-wide, put this in context as what's been going on at the community level, and then some more on Hyde Park. And as the commissioner said, I can go so far, and then I have to stop given the investigation that's going on and our role in this, what the solution here. So, just a couple of slides to remind everybody what VEPSA is and what we do. So you created us in 1979 specifically to help public power entities act as their kind of back office. A lot of these folks have two people in the office and a couple of line workers, and they don't really have the capacity to react to the regulatory environment and some of the technology issues they're dealing with. So we handle that. Don't need to go into our guiding principles. He's a little time. A little bit on the membership. The chair mentioned Hyde Park was not a VEPSA member. They actually were. They were a member up until 2016. We have a 2-year notice to get out. So they actually left in 2019 and went on their own.
Okay.
They hired an entity in Massachusetts called Energy New England to run their power supply, and they did everything else themselves. But over the past few years, we've seen people moving back into the organization. So there are 11 full members that we provide everything for. They pay a percentage of our bill, and they can call on staff anytime. Burlington Electric and Stowe Electric are now what's called strategic members. So they participate on our board conversations. They have access to the resources, but they pay on an hourly basis. It's not a percentage of the cost. And then we have a number of contracts that have happened over the last few years. Washington Electric has been, for some time, we've managed power supply for them. They do a lot of stuff themselves internally, but we are the ones who handle their renewable energy credits and power contracts, things of that nature. Global Foundries actually was here a couple of years ago to get to be their own utility. When they actually got out into the New England market and realized what was involved, they decided they needed some help. So they've contracted with us to provide power supply services and some of the regulatory aspects as well. And we work with a number of entities in New Hampshire and Maine. Kearsarge Energy is actually a power marketer who has a lot of projects in Massachusetts, but has to submit those into the New England market. So we do contracted services for them as a private entity. And as of, I think it was October when we finally signed the contract, we're now helping Hyde Park. And as of today, with Scott's help, we're essentially managing a utility. My CFO sits in their office every day, running the office operations, and Morrisville is handling the field aspects of it. All the list of services, and we talked about some of these financial. We were actually created originally to let municipals invest in the McNeil biomass plant that Burlington was building in the 80s.
So we were very much a finance entity originally. And now you look at the list today and we're doing renewable energy standards, key accounts, legislative, regulatory. As of a few years ago, we provide IT support. We actually have built into our budget cybersecurity. So the IT staff actually provide services to all of our members. We procure computer equipment for them. We monitor their system, provide coverage and patching and education, all those aspects.
How many staff do you have, Ken?
Right now we're at 20, up from about 16 3 years ago, and we're looking at adding more. This is an eye chart. The key thing is to say this is a rate comparison that we do at the end of every year. So this is as of 12/15/25. Just say the orange bar is the co-ops, the gray bar is Green Mountain Power, and the blue is all the municipal utilities. So from an affordability rate standpoint, the municipals are still the lowest rates in the state. Now, people will argue, is that the rate's too low? Do you need to increase them to provide services or hire staff? But this is directly at the heart of the way municipalities operate. They are concerned about the cost to consumers, and they're going to do everything they can to wring every dollar out of the operation. So they're very much affordable to the customers they serve. This is one aspect of the SQRP that the commissioner was referencing, specifically on reliability. And again, just the colors of the charts, the blue is municipalities, orange the co-ops, gray is Green Mountain Power, and then in this case, yellow is the statewide average. It only puts this up here to say, each utility has its own demographics, its own service territory. Our numbers are going to move around. But if you're looking statewide, the municipalities are some of the most reliable utilities as well.
Rep. Sevilla?
Yeah, can you just go back one slide? Just in terms of affordability and the top three, those are significantly larger geographic areas.
Correct.
Which presumably is a significantly larger cost for maintenance and hardening and recovery from the effects of climate change that we're seeing, particularly in our co-ops, which are very rural.
Yeah,
and
I think rural is going to be more costly for sure, and that's why the co-ops are at the top. It's really it comes down to how many kilowatt hours do you sell per mile of line, right? And so if you have a dense population, you tend to be able to reduce costs.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Rep.
Can you just run through the acronyms at the top of those three graphs, please?
Sure.
They're at the bottom. Thank you. I didn't see that.
Yeah, have a definition down below.
Got it.
So these are the standard reliability metrics. So how many customers are out for a given time? How long are they out?
Yeah.
How quickly can you get them back on? We're looking in conjunction with the department. We're actually looking at adding more metrics here to get a better granular view of reliability. But these have been the standard in utilities for 100 years.
Thank you.
I won't dwell on this. Commissioner hit them all. We face the same challenges that other utilities do. Have an aging workforce. Inflation is pretty significant right now. In addition to the tariffs, federal tax policy is changing, and it's at odds with Vermont's renewable energy standard and climate policies. So you're seeing federal tax incentives go away for the same resources we're trying to build, which makes them more expensive on a per kilowatt hour basis. At the elected official level or appointed official level, there's declining volunteerism. People just don't want to spend the time to be on a village board or a town board. So there's a lot more having to go out and recruit people and try to draw them in. Pace of technology, not only in how quick your iPhone changes, and we're up to 18 now, but just the equipment that the utilities have to put in. Also, it's not only expertise you need to be able to install that equipment and run it, but you're changing over computers. It's a 5-year cycle when you have to keep reinvesting in this equipment. It becomes a standard part of your cost structure. And the commissioner mentioned customer expectations. It used to be you could have 2 days out, and then people would start calling, hey, do you am I going to be back on next couple of days? And today it's an hour and you're getting screened at. But the evidence, I think, shows that the municipalities as a total are meeting the challenges. They are actively maintaining affordability, maintaining reliability. We have a technology roadmap where VEPS is helping them put in advanced metering technology, SCADA, demand resource software to manage customer appliances. That's all ongoing right now. And they started amongst themselves, even aside from VEPSA, there are conversations going on in each part of the state about how the municipalities themselves can share staff and get more efficient. We're aware of conversations going on in the Northeast Kingdom with Orleans Electric, Barton Electric, and Linden Electric. Their trustees are jointly meeting, talking about can they operate more like one utility and use the same call center, use the same software. That will kind of organically grow over time. The same conversation is beginning in Lamoille County with Morrisville and Hardwick, and to some degree with Scott Johnstone managing on a temporary basis, at least all three utilities. Hyde Park is in that conversation as well. And we're also seeing in Franklin County, Swanton and Enosburg have been doing this for a number of years. They share hydro operators and line crews. So those discussions are going on. Getting into Hyde Park, we're in a unique position here in that we were asked, as an entity, Hyde Park left in 2019, we were asked to come back, and the original request was that we do the financial due diligence to figure out what happened, how can we fix it, put the rate cases together that are required to get revenue coming in from Hyde Park, and also put together a long-term financial or business plan about how do you get this utility into a place where it's an operating entity going forward, so they can actually take a breath and have the conversation about whether they want to continue as a utility or not. I remember vividly, Saturday morning, commissioner called me and says, "Ken, we have a problem." What do you mean we? And that quickly turned into Hyde Park's in trouble. What can we do? We had an emergency VEPSA board meeting where I presented this to the board. Unanimous vote to have us step in and try to help. That little did I know that 2 weeks later turned into the manager of Hyde Park leaving with 2 hours notice, and us then scrambling to bring Morrisville in as an acting manager. And Scott stepped up without hesitation and agreed to be the acting village manager. So, in a course of a couple of weeks from finding out there was a problem to we're actually managing the utility, it was a very quick turnaround time. I would echo due diligence is still happening. My CFO has dug into the financials going back a number of years. We believe we understand all the debt, the accounts payable that the Hyde Park has still outstanding, who they owe and how much. But we're still turning out. Customers will call in and say, "Hey, I paid my deposit for a line extension 2 years ago. What's going on?" And we're have to dig through the files. Like, okay, do we have the money? Is this a real project? Where did it get left off? That stuff is still happening.
I think I've just looking at the length of time and the parties involved over the years. I was going to ask, and maybe you probably can't answer this, but if there was any reason to believe that funds had been misappropriated, but
we have not found any evidence of that yet. The commissioner described it as there were a series of bad decisions. Mm-hmm. Effectively what happened, I'll get this on the next slide, but Hyde Park, the last thing they did with the VEPSA on their way out the door was we filed a rate case for them in the 2018-2019 timeframe. That was about a 15%, if I can go forward. Yeah, the bottom of this slide, it was a 15.69% rate increase that they requested. What ultimately got approved was 7.75%. So if you talk to folks in Hyde Park, they point to this as trigger for them because they feel they had cost justifying a 16% increase, and the state regulatory process gave them half of that. So they felt like they were immediately in we need to borrow money to keep operating type mode, which is what they did. They went to their local bank, and got a line of credit and started paying bills with a line of credit. Well, at the end of the year, you get the line of credit, you still don't have any more money coming in. You have to renew the line of credit, roll over the interest, and you keep, and they've done that. Frankly, they did it for 10 years. So if you go back in the audited financials, and we've done this, you'll show a small loss 10 years ago, and that loss has just increased every year over time. They had some difficulty finding rate consultants. Frankly, I think that was partly due to the way management was treating the consultants. Folks would start the work and they'd have difficulty getting information, and they'd say, well, we can't help you. This is too much effort. So in the end, they ended up using this 218DN process and saying, well, we'll ask for a 2%, we'll ask for a 3% and see if that's enough to get us through. And it clearly wasn't. But just to put a pin in, we do rate cases probably 10 a year. The average cost for a utility, whether you're Small Hyde Park or a Washington Electric, which is one of the larger utilities we work with, it's about $40,000 to file a full rate case. Given the level of scrutiny, I mean, testimony and financial reports and everything that you need to put together to go through that process, it's not a cheap endeavor. So municipalities tend to wait until they absolutely need to have that happen. Let's go back here for 1 second. I mentioned there are two managers, the one that passed away, and then their replacement trustees. I would argue the Vermont regulatory structure actually played a role in this. And I'm going to have a contrary opinion to whether we need more regulation to solve the problem. I think it kind of leans the other way in actuality. But key issues we found so far, the village structure in this case masked the underlying electric department issues. So if you look at the audited financial reports for Hyde Park, they have governmental funds, which is their taxpayer roads and all the general operations. And then they have enterprise funds. Well, Hyde Park runs a water department, a sewer department, and an electric department. And the auditors combine those three into one category for the audited financials. And there's a chart or a table that lately, here's the electric revenue, here's the electric status, water, and wastewater. But that's in a 60-page audit, that's like 1 page. If you look at the enterprise funds as a total, they look fine. They have extra money, they have a positive fund balance. It's not until you dive into the electric department specifically that you start to see there's an issue. So I think the way that the financials were put together created some ambiguity on as to what was actually going on.
So basically combining those masked the actual problem that was happening.
Right. And in Hyde Park's case, I think the commissioner described it as if there was some omission. So you've got the actual hard numbers that the auditors put together, and then you've got this MD&A document, the management discussion that the management puts together, and it goes on in front of the audit. Well, the MD&A made everything sound like it was perfectly fine. So you had to really dive into the details of the financial to see what the issue was.
Rep Cutler, you had to stand up first.
Can you give us just general scale? What where Hyde Park Electric's annual revenue and how big is the pile of debt right now?
Yeah, so their revenues as a utility are roughly 3 million a year. If you include the whole package of the debt related to the solar project that they have, the revolving lines of credit they've taken out, and the accounts payable, which is actually fairly large, it's a total of about $4.5 million.
Yeah, that's a tough ratio.
Wait, sorry, that's their annual expense or that's their accumulated debt? Accumulated debt.
Their annual revenue is roughly 3 million,
yes.
and their total debt, including accounts payable, which on their books isn't technically debt, but it's amount of money owed.
Yeah.
It's about $4.5 million.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Now we have two questions. That 4.5 million includes the solar project?
It does. About 2 million of that is related to
2 million to solar. And when it comes to this, the water company and the wastewater company and electric company, when it comes to the bottom line, they all come down to one blue number but the electric company is the only identity that's involved. They're in deficit.
Correct.
And my local town, if they don't have the revenue coming in from a project, then the tax rate supports the lack of income coming in from the source. Does that happen with the village? Does the village?
It has not, and that's one of the issues that is thorny in this case. The village, if you look at the debt, the loan documents, the loans were taken out in the name of the village as a whole, which would imply that they're a taxpayer obligation. But the money that was borrowed was used for electric department operations, which would imply it's electric ratepayers. And Hyde Park has got another issue here in that the residents of the village are like 300 to 400 people, and they serve 1,200 ratepayers. So there's a big discrepancy if it's a taxpayer obligation or a ratepayer obligation. Part of what we're still struggling through and looking at the financial is being able to tie, okay, Hyde Park borrowed this amount of money. Where did they specifically use it? Tie that to an electric department expense, because when we file the phase 2 rate case that was mentioned, that's going to be a PUC question. It's okay, in order to approve this, even if we decide that this special treatment for Hyde Park is warranted, we need to be able to document that those borrowed money actually went to electric department costs and electric ratepayer should have to pay for it. We still do not have that completely linked out. So there's work to do there.
So are there people who reside in the town of Hyde Park who are not served by Hyde Park Electric?
There are. I think some folks are VEC customers.
VEC, Morrisville, and Johnson.
Yeah. So sitting where I am, and I'll grant you, my view is more a municipal view than a state view. So I'm looking as more of a local official as to what's going on. I spent more than a decade on select boards and county boards in Chittenden County and have worked at VEPSA over the course of 2 times. There right out of college and then came back to be general manager. I did 20 years at VEPSA and 20 years at Burlington Electric. So steeped in municipal side. But when I look at this, and I was just talking to our national association over the weekend about regulation of utilities and how different states do it. Vermont is one of 6 states in the country that actually regulates municipal utilities. In most states, they say, well, the local government is responsible for their operations. If they have an electric department, it's up to them to operate that system and make sure it's healthy and viable and can continue to operate. There are two other states that say, well, if you own a utility that's completely in your own municipal boundaries, you're on your own. But if you serve people outside, now the state's going to get involved. So nationally, there's only 8 states out of 50 that regulate municipal utilities. What I'm seeing in Hyde Park, part of the issue is all the experts were relying on somebody else when they were doing the auditor. Well, the bank looked at this and they were fine. The DPS has looked at it, we're good. You talk to the bank and they said, well, the auditors looked at it and they're good. DPS didn't say anything, so we're fine. You go to the DPS and they say, well, the auditor should have raised this. Well, how did we? So everybody was counting on somebody else to surface the information. I argue, and I may have a minority opinion, I recognize that. But I think the amount of regulation and oversight that's coming down from the state level actually clouds the governance of the utility. Now the local municipality feels like they're not really responsible. They're going to take their filing to the state. It's going to come out however it comes out, and they're going to move on.
I have a question. Do you want to finish this page? Sorry.
So what we're finding is, like in rate setting, when we sit down and talk to the DPS or the PUC about financial health, they say, well, the utility should have 16 to 90 days of operating cash on hand for things that go wrong. But when you actually sit down to do the rate case is based on what did you spend historically in what we call the test year. And then what do you know, what can you prove has changed in the upcoming years? If you have an employment contract or something you can document a change, then that's allowed in. Nowhere in that process does it build in 60 to 90 days of operating cash. So the municipalities are constantly feeling, I don't have any working capital to deal with. And it's a result of the way rate making has been happening in Vermont for at least 60 years. And then the cost of complexity, the $40,000 cost that I mentioned, and the having to have expert testimony and things like that. The combination of those really incentivizes municipal utilities, I think in particular, not to file rate cases unless it's absolutely necessary. That's part of the reason BEPSA actually was the proponent of the bill to create 218DN, where local utilities can raise rates 3%, because we thought that with that flexibility would incentivize the municipalities to do more consistent rate cases. And we're starting to see that. But 3% now isn't, annual costs go up a lot more than that.
Well, 10% in only 1 year up just general living.
Yeah. So I think we'll be looking at potentially tweaking that going forward.
So,
Rep. I'm sorry.
Don't go ahead.
Rep. Campbell.
Yeah, I get it. So I'm wondering whether not more regulation, but more consolidation, perhaps, and the commissioner argued against consolidation, but more work, perhaps more work done by IPSA to support the munis. Maybe I'm wondering about other ways of streamlining the system and reducing costs by I don't know, some sort of consolidation, whether it's consolidating services or consolidating actual utilities. You mentioned a number of communities are already working together to have the same software, have the same procedures, or whatever. Is that the trend that you're seeing, sort of over the long term? Is that a way of creating a more robust system?
Yeah, I think there are 3 things. There, on the field operation and customer service side and dealing directly with customers, we're seeing municipalities more and more talk about how do they utilize the staff and the research that they've got better by cooperating and sharing staff.
Just between
Just-
muni to muni, not through BIPSA.
Not through VEPSA, correct. We're seeing that, and I think it's gaining steam. Those conversations are happening more regularly, more frequently. At the same time, as I mentioned, Director Sebelius's question, we've added 4 staff in the last 3 years, and there's another staff member in this year's budget, and I expect there's going to be a couple more going forward, because on the technology, the cyber, and the regulatory side, it's all getting more complex. Not all from the state. I mean, there are federal guidelines that are starting to come down on the small munis too. So we're adding staff and we're providing more services. And you're seeing, utilities that had left or weren't involved with us are asking to participate because they're running into the same problem. And I personally think that there is efficiencies that can be gained in the statutory regulation of utilities to push some of the responsibility and authority back down to municipal officials and clear up who's actually responsible for making this utility work.
Well, that's the other part of it, is that the munis are effectively managed by volunteer boards who may not typically don't have the expertise, I guess I'll go out on a limb and say, to do that kind of management.
Yeah.
So that's
they hire
this the whole atmosphere, landscape, I guess, of electric utilities is requiring more professionalization because of all the factors that have been cited. And yet we're still relying on small select boards, village trustees to do this management. Is that
I think most of the boards have been very effective at hiring professional management.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this was a specific failure of a manager in one utility.
Yeah.
But in general, I think having volunteer boards who hire a professional manager to work with experts, including VEPSA, that can help them navigate the environment, I think works. I don't see as I put up before, I mean, some of the lowest rates, some of the best reliability, it's effective, but it takes all parties actively managing and understanding what their roles are.
Yeah.
And there's some gray areas in the way we're set up. The other thing that we have found, and I think this was a conversation at the VEPSA board before Hyde Park even came up. New trustees coming in, boards that turn over, as you mentioned, Representative Campbell, people come in, they don't know the first thing about utilities and how complex it is. A lot of municipalities are members of VLCT, Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Their boards go to VLCT trainings and they say, okay, I've been through the governance training, I'm good. VLCT doesn't know or teach anything about electric utilities or electric utility regulation. So Hyde Park, the VEPSA board was talking about this before, and Hyde Park has really hit it home. There's a gap in training for local officials. So we're actively right now putting a training program together for Hyde Park to make them understand, if you're going to be a trustee and run an electric utility, here's the things you need to know and do. Both in governance and in finance. It was shocking to me when we got into Hyde Park that there are 4 trustees. None of them knew anything about finance. They didn't know what questions to ask. And so the manager would provide information to them and they would take it at face value. They weren't getting monthly financial reports. They were getting the audit, but not the 115 letters, which really tell you what's going on. So we see that gap in being able to train new trustees when they come in and make them really understand as something VEPSA can step in and take over, and both for Hyde Park directly and more generally have like an annual conference for the commissioners and trustees and go and run through that. And then I won't go into the financial metrics. That's the assessment that the TPS and BEPS have been working on. We're at the phase now where we feel we know what the ask is going to be, and we're starting to gather data to be responsive to the questions.
Rep. Howland?
They filed a rate case in 2019. This is called the part. When would that rate case settle? 2021?
I don't know for sure. I believe it was mid to end 2020.
And then, so now they have the 218 DN, 10% max. That 3% at each time. Who regulates that?
So the way it works is the Public Utility Commission put out guidelines for what information they feel needs to be included when you make that filing. The utility puts the information together and says, okay, we need 3% based on this financial information and this narrative of what's going on. And they have to file that with both the Public Utility Commission and the Department of Public Service. But it's set up to be the reverse of a normal rate case. So when you file a normal rate case with the Public Utility Commission, you have to proactively put in testimony and exhibits and treat it like a court case.
You do your test year and your rate year.
Yeah.
And how many of the munis have facilitated the max of the 10%? First, there's two questions here. The 3% set by the PUC, and if you had an inflated year where just normal inflation went up at the sub 8% rate, who set the 3% rate? Should that be increased to a larger number? Hopefully we don't have those. But how many munis took advantage of the full 10% before they started preparing a rate case?
Yeah, nobody has hit the 10% threshold yet. We've had, I believe, 5 municipal utilities have filed under this 218D approach for either 2 or 3%. The 3% is actually set in statute. So to change that number would require an action of this body. And it started at 2%. I think it was increased to 3% a couple of years ago. And we're looking at it now and saying, oh, that might not be enough going forward.
Yeah.
And those 3%, they can go in automatically.
So it's set up so that the utility files, submits that request, submits what they're planning to do to the Public Utility Commission and Department of Public Service. There's a 45-day waiting period before it takes effect. And in that waiting period, the department or the commission can say, we want an investigation. If they do not take action, then it automatically goes into effect.
And that can happen multiple times a year?
Only once in a 12-month period. It's a rolling 12-month period. So the question was
just one other.
Yeah.
So Hyde Park never went in for the 3%, or did they do it once or twice?
It did twice. So they did the 2019 filing, got the answer on that. About 2 years later, they filed for 2%.
Okay.
And then a year later, they filed for 3%. To be fair, the Public Utility Commission looked at the 3% and the financial information that Hyde Park had provided. It said, we think you need a bigger number, so provide us. But at the end of the day, the commission did not open an investigation. They asked for more information, that was satisfied, and then they let the 3% go into effect.
Okay.
Just to close out, Hyde Park, as was said before, it's a unique situation. Very specific decisions made over a 10-year period, 2 different managers. I think collaboratively between the PUC kind of has to stay at arm's length because they're the court at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. But I'm having weekly conversations with the commissioner and trying to figure out how do we get through this in a way that meets the regulatory requirements while still getting what the village needs to actually keep operating. The goal here from our perspective is get Hyde Park back to a place where it can pay its bills, it's financially viable, and then the utility can have the conversation. Do we want to continue doing this or not? But it's going to play out over probably another year to year and a half. We have a filing in phase 2 that's due on April 15th. And that really will kick off the next deep dive into how we got to where we are. And I expect that investigation is going to take several months to play out. So we're really looking at like the next biennium when this would come up again. If there is any legislation needed or any changes, it would be really a conversation for next year.
Tomorrow.
Do you have enough information from your other members to be confident that there are no red flags on other municipals at this point?
Yes. We actually get more information than the regulators get. We do see the audited financials pretty regularly. Each utility sits on our board of directors, so we have some insight from those conversations and the projects that they're involved in. Because anytime they sign a contract with us, we have certain financial information that they're obligated to provide. So we kind of sit between the DPS and the utilities, and I wouldn't say there aren't challenges. I mean, there are some utilities that are struggling, and we're helping them figure out how do they manage their cash flow and how do they pay, especially power costs, which really bounce right now in this market. Winter and summer bills from ISO New England can be substantially different, and that's a real challenge for utilities, right? Because the customer payments are lagged by up to 60 days from when you send your bill, but the ISO New England bills are coming in every week. So you're having to pay in the winter really high costs, but you don't collect the revenue from your customers for those high usage months until the spring. So we routinely have to help the members manage that cash flow, how to get through year to year. But overall, I am not seeing any other VEPSA members or anybody we work with, because we have others that aren't members that we work with, having similar situations.
Last question, so we make sure to make time for Scott.
So you manage the power supply or the integrated resource that may be the power supply for the ongoing spot market or today and already contracted future. Are you short on power supply and on energy so that you're buying on the spot market and then sharing it amongst the communities that you?
Yeah, each utility really sets its own, what we call a hedging plan. So how much they want to buy in advance and how much they're buying from the open market. We have a conversation with the management and the trustees from each utility about what that looks like. And then our role really is to guide them, is to understand what's the implications, and then to purchase what they desire, they want their municipality to have. So long way of answering, like some municipalities like to be a little short and have some amount of power they buy from the spot market. Others want to be over covered and be in a selling position with the market. And it's really up to them individually how they manage that.
Yeah, just one quick, so what did happen to Barton Electric? Did Orleans take that over or
no?
VEC take it?
So at the end of the day, the village trustees put to vote whether they should sell to the co-op. The village residents pretty substantially voted that down. So they voted to keep their utility. They have hired a new manager. They have a person who's managing the office, but they made the conscious decision that they didn't want their own line crews. So they actually have a contract right now with Orleans Electric to provide all the line crew maintenance, line extensions, and things like that. Which is what I say. I mean, they looked at it and said, well, the most efficient use of resources is for Orleans to have the line crews, and we just pay for the cost. And they're now talking about, well, do we share a financial manager? Do we sort of run our books together because we can save money on staffing that way? Those type of conversations are going on all the time.
And are they a VEPSA member now or they are?
Hyde Park is the only municipality that's not officially a VEPSA member. And I'm going to their meeting tonight to explain to them what that would look like if they were to join.
Yeah.
But they can't afford it then.
They'll actually save money if they join.
Ken, thank you so much for your time, and for your testimony. Appreciate it. And we do need to adjourn by 5:12.
That'd be easy.
Okay. Great.
Well, it depends on your question, of course.
Yeah.
I'm Scott Johnstone. I'm the general manager at for Morrisville Water and Light. As I said at the top, also helping both Hardwick and Hyde Park currently. So 3 electric utilities, 2 water utilities, 2 sewer utilities, and 2 general government entities. So busy, but actually in the broad scale, people always ask, all in it's less than 25 million. It's like 30, 35 employees. It's not a very big company. It's just complicated because of all the governance stuff. So it's not as big an onerous a thing as it sounds like. So just want to let you know, to give you some assurance that like it's actually doable, at least for some period of time. So I think we'll be all right there. But thank you for having me in to testify, Chair James and the rest of the committee. So I'm going to specifically, I have provided written testimony. I'm not going to repeat everything you've already heard and just burn up time. So I'll try to pick through my notes and see what is value add.
Great, thank you.
As I go down through here. I do want to say though, even though it is a little redundant, that foundationally and fundamentally, there's nothing wrong or broken with the municipal model. As you've heard, it provides really low cost, reliable service, and that's been the history of it. And it's also not without its warts, but every model has its warts, right? So ours have been challenges with management and governance and fiscal acumen. And they occasionally show up in different places. And in Hyde Park, all 3 showed up at the same time. And that's really what makes it different. You find those sort of issues bounce up in any small business in Vermont from time to time. We're no different. But it doesn't mean that the model's broken. Again, we've been really good at delivering that historic value proposition. I think the other challenge we've had, and I know from my time in various roles in this building, it's been a matter of consternation sometimes in this building. Munis, because of that frugality and that drive to keep costs low, have been accused of dragging their feet on technology and adopting new customer programs and moving quickly enough on new policies adopted by this body. And let's just be honest and admit that there has been some truth in that. Like, we are not as advanced on technology and certain customer programming as other utilities. And that somewhat explains why we're a little bit lower cost today, right? Not right, good or bad. I'm not trying to distinguish who's doing things right or wrong. Just saying, hey, let's expose it all, right? I would say what's changed is, our local governance continues to this day to care a whole lot about the price of the bill and the level of the rate. That still matters a lot locally. But I think what's changed is we're not going to raise rates for any reason. It's what's the most cost-effective way to advance on technology? What's the best way to advance on customer programming to meet the needs of our customers in a way that makes the most economic sense? So I do think there's been a pretty big change. Ken was noting some of the sorts of things going on at BEPSA, whether it's SCADA or DERMS or any of these other things that we can get into in depth that are new investments. We built out in our last integrated resource plan, even before BEPSA had one for us all, a very detailed technology roadmap of how we were going to move Morrisville down that path to really be able to serve not just what's necessary today to run these utilities, but what's necessary to run it by, say, 2035. When we're really proud. We committed in our IRP to be at 100% by 2030 before you change the date to 2035. So we're committed to getting there. And I'd say the munis generally are all moving faster than they have on all of these fronts. I think that's really positive and simply speaks to the fact that there's not something foundationally broke in the face of everything that's going on in Hyde Park here, which is important to think about. I would say, only because in my testimony, you'll see slightly different numbers than Ken Nolan shared with you about the current state of the challenge in Hyde Park. And that's because I asked his CFO to update the numbers yesterday. Since the new revenues aren't actually coming in yet, the level of the accounts payable is continuing to grow because the imbalance hasn't shown up hasn't been remedied in the books yet. So the numbers I put in, I actually took the solar debt out because I think it is its own challenge, that solar debt. And we can speak more about that. But we're actually encouraged by the department, the munis, and pushed to take on more project debt. They actually want us, when we're making capital improvements and capital investments, the department believes we have not been taking on enough debt of that type, opting to pay cash, to pay as we go over time. So to include the project debt in with operating debt, to me, masks the problem and overinflates it. So it really is very close to 1 year's worth of revenue stream for the electric, is about the size of the operating debt. And you heard what most of those categories are. The one I would add, which is just another level of governance breaking, is that apparently, and Ken would have to answer more specifics because this is not research of mine, but without really any internal paper being created, the village borrowed money from its other two utilities to loan it to the electric utility, but didn't really paper that in any way that anyone can discern. So, it has placed those other utilities financially more at risk, though they're stable. And this is just another form of debt, internal debt that they took on. So it's about $3 million apiece of revenues per year, and what they've accumulated over 10 years in pure, everything else out of the way, operating debt, right? And on the accounts payable, if you think about this, for those of you that know business management, your hair is going to go up on your neck or on your arm soon, because it turns out on the accounts payable to be about a net 120 is what we're pulling off right now today, in terms of paying vendors, which means we are figuring out who to pay every day and who is willing to continue and help us and extend with us. And once this rate case gets, it is in effect, and the first bills have started going out with it in place, or will in another week or so. When that happens and people start paying, that imbalance will at least come together and it won't get worse. Then we have to get through phase 2 that you've heard about before you can really start making progress on that accounts payable. So fortunately, vendors have stayed with us. They understand that at some level, we have an obligation to keep asking for rate increases until we can actually meet our obligations. So that goes a long way with most folks, and we don't want to take advantage of the goodwill of people, but right now, that's just the world we're living in terms of what it takes to keep the doors open. Morrisville was mostly brought in really just to, as I say, keep the lights on and the water running both ways. So that's what we've been doing on a day-to-day basis. And the reason I say that is, because it's the old, but wait, there's more. So the debt issues you've heard about are all of those past issues. But there also have been operational issues that have not been addressed at this utility for a really long time, equally as long as the debt. From a reliability perspective, what the staff tell me is they really haven't done any proactive vegetative maintenance in a decade. They sit in a hollow, and so they're pretty protected from all directions from wind. So they actually don't have a whole lot of outages as a result of that. That doesn't mean it will always be the case, and it doesn't mean they shouldn't be keeping their right-of-ways clear. I will tell you, I got very nervous a week ago when we were projected to have the big ice storm, because if something like that were to hit their system right now on 1998 ice storm, for those of you that remember that, you wouldn't just have trees on the line. You could have a mile's worth of poles on the ground, and because of the level of inactivity that's occurred on that line. So there's a whole lot of catch up to do on that front. They also had, which was subject to an early order from the department as well, included in all that early work, was to look at their substation. They have one substation to serve their whole system. It had been experiencing difficulty and had not been well maintained. About 2 weeks into our stepping in, it got to a certain state that it became clear it was in failure mode. my electric superintendent in Morrisville and I decided that it had to be not only taken offline, but red tagged, meaning it can't be used again until it meets certain requirements. We shifted the entirety of Hyde Park onto the Morrisville system and bypassed the substation. That creates other operational difficulties, which we've addressed. In the process of that, we also learned that every time new service was necessary for any reason, they have what's called a three-phase line. So there's 3 taps you can run off of, and you're supposed to keep those balanced to be most operational. In their case, they had 60 amps on the units don't really matter. You'll get the math. They had 60 amps on one, 65 on another, and 170 on the middle phase. So not surprisingly, as soon as they were on the Morrisville system, that middle phase started basically melting the fuses consistently. We've got it figured out. There's currently 140 amp fuse on those, which should hold it for now. We have data loggers all over the system, and we're figuring out all the work that has to be done to now redistribute all those loads, and that won't be free. We're hoping we can do an interim step on their substation for $30,000 that would allow it to come back online. One of the things we learned is that the transformer was not full of oil and therefore wasn't full of gas on top of the oil. And that's largely what was causing the issue. We think it was literally having a lightning storm inside the transformer. It was arcing. The experts told us if we hadn't taken the action we did, we were probably 6 hours at most from it exploding and taking out all the switching gear too, which probably would have been a many-week outage at that point. It would have been quite challenging at that point because those transformers, we don't have access to those. Just to get one, we would have had to find one, we would have rebuilt all the switching, all those sort of things would have happened. We think we turned it off in time to at least make temporary repairs. We're getting the vendor out to check that out. Ultimately, to replace that system and update the transformer, it's a fairly good sized transformer. That whole project will probably be another $750,000 investment to bring that up to code and bring it up to snuff. That's what our power engineer is telling us currently. So you have a question?
Yeah.
Replacing the transformer also on for
yes,
for 700,000.
Yeah. So it's just to let you know that there's another wave. So you've heard of phase A and B, but then there are operational deficiencies that are going to have to be addressed going forward. And those are the ones we've uncovered so far. We'll see where that leads us on that front. Just scrolling down through here, we've talked about technology. I would say, there's been some discussion about the scale of utilities. I thought it'd be useful to weigh in on this in a couple ways. First, I would say I've been at Morrisville since 2022, and about 2 months into my tenure, I went to the Morrisville board and said, there is, as you look forward to the regulatory and policy construct of Vermont, and not just Vermont, but New England and other parts of the country. So we're not the only people adopting these things to say that out loud. There's going to become a certain scale of utility that is minimum. I posited at the time that I thought Morrisville was probably about the tipping point of what might be viable. Since then, I've thought much more about that. It's not as simple as, how much is your revenue? It's your revenue, it's your personnel resource, it's how much of your system is commercial, industrial versus residential, how rural are your lines, how many customers per mile do you have on those lines? There's no formula that's going to give you the answer of what's viable. But what's really clear to me is that, at 1,200 customers, I find it challenging to see that a utility that small, if they're not a unicorn, like say a Stowe, and they have, 70% commercial, and therefore really big revenues with very little to maintain, you're going to see these challenges come up with the very, very small. It's why when Hardwick recently asked Morrisville to have a conversation about all the ways we could collaborate, from sharing manager for now all the way to possible merger, is why the Morrisville board said yes, because we want to make sure that we are one of the people that can meet that test going forward as we approach 2035. And we're fine today. I think most of the municipals are, but it's just some color on why are all these conversations happening around the state. I'm not the only one that's come to realize that, is what I'm telling you. I think it's generally accepted across most of the VEPSA members that these sort of dialogues they're about being able to do right by our customers and have a viable future for our customers. That makes sense. So that's all happening. I also would share some of what Ken had talked about the process of rate making as one of the challenges that we face. And I just wanted to add a couple of points of color on that as well. One is I think it's worth acknowledging, as we say, perhaps it's time to rethink some of the rate making process, that it worked really, really well for a very, very long time. In the old days, the electric industry was pretty doggone static, right? Very few sources of energy. You got your distribution lines. There wasn't a lot of growth, and it all just kind of worked. So looking mostly backwards was not a terrible idea. And part of what I would say is that doesn't work anymore. In addition to all the things you heard from both the commissioner and then Ken, the one I would add is in addition to those pieces, there's also the piece of the cost of electrification, the cost of adopting technology, the cost of implementing programs. Those are not usually considered known and measurable looking forward. So when we take those on, we're expected to figure out how to front the money. We're not allowed to have any net revenues sitting in cash, or it's the level of the rate increase is reduced. So that the presumption is you're going to use that cash that you have, if you have any days cash on hand. So you have to figure out a way to front the cash when it may be years before you can actually recover it in a rate case. And that's on top of all the other things that Ken had raised. So again, doesn't mean that looking backwards shouldn't be part of it, and that checks and balances to make sure that customers are only paying that which is reasonable for them to pay. Of course, we all want all of that, but there has to be another component with the policy construct and the regulatory construct that we're all driving towards today and in the next 10 years in Vermont that enables a utility to be financially healthy by being able to incorporate some of those costs that are coming in the current year, not 5 years from now. Like, you actually have a plan. It's in your IRP. It's in your budget. You're doing it this year. There's got to be some way to start pulling some of that in. And I've had this conversation with the commissioner, so I'm not speaking out of school, to be clear. And so we'll want to add that as a little bit of color as well. So yeah, I'll stop there and see if you have any questions. I think there is a way forward for Hyde Park. Again, my guess is it includes talking to somebody. It doesn't have to be Morrisville. We're not there for that. We're there really just to help a neighbor, because that's what the communities do. They've got a lot of options. They could talk to Johnson, they could talk to VEC, they can talk to us. And I think their trustees are aware that they're going to have those sort of talks and that thinking. What they have is an amazing community. They have great staff that are trying really, really hard and are weathering through all this with just a brutal, story to tell their customers right now. And having been the person that stood in front of the community forums we've been having, as you heard from the commissioner, we decided to run to the fire immediately. It has been so incredibly respectful and just solution oriented and wanting to find a way. With time, frustration is building, and we're getting some of the worst that happens in 2026 in the world of social media. So is that beginning to happen? Yes. But when you actually go talk to people, and it's been so constructive, it speaks really well of the community and their interests. So that's what makes me believe that there's a useful way forward that will end up in good solutions, both for them, but also more broadly for the way that we all move forward as communities and, frankly, a broader energy system in the state.
Yeah, well, I guess I would ask a question about, you were talking about the need for incorporating more prospective analysis of what the costs are coming down spike in rate making. At the same time, I'm thinking about strategies for driving rates down. If we're going to be successful at electrification over long term, we've got to make that attractive economically for people. So what are the strategies for spreading cost pressure over more entities so that the per unit cost is lower.
So I think we mentioned some of that, which is the ways that we want to collaborate and I think there's other pieces like group purchasing and other ways we can look at those things.
Yeah.
I would say though that I think not just here in Vermont, but across the whole energy landscape, if we're really going to electrify most everything over time, and that's not just a Vermont bill or a Vermont decision, that's happening all around us, right?
Yeah.
Electricity is going to cost more. And if you do the math on that, which I have for our system, electricity can actually go up in cost a fair amount, and the resultant output still be cheaper than gasoline, oil, and propane. So while the electric bill will go up, the total energy bill does not have to. And to me, that's a different definition of efficiency that we should consider. And I also think that this has been sort of the conundrum, and it's not the reason you're saying it. But I'm going to say how it plays out often with discussions with trustees and select board and community members. This drive to have a lower rate actually compels you to not make technology investments and not make investments necessary to get ready for electrification. So I actually think we have to, I don't know what the right words are, but I think we've got to change the words we use so that it's more about what the energy bills are going to be. The real challenge in that to me, and again, because I've done the math, it's how do you time the new investments in reconductoring all the lines and upgrading the size of the transformers and all the other stuff we have to do to when people actually are making the decisions to electrify so that new revenues are coming in to pay the bills. And it's not put on the backs of those that might be laggards and not like the idea of having an electric vehicle or want to keep their wood stove and don't want to have a heat pump. Maybe we would all wish people would come to the new world at the same time, but some people want to see others lead and adopt once you get past a certain tipping point. And so there's a real serious timing problem here that I'm not smart enough to figure out on my own. I can tell you that. I think about it. I think about it all the time about how are we going to work our way into this. One of the things we did is I don't know if others have done this, but in Morrisville, we have done a full analysis of if our whole system was 100% electrified, what is every project we have to do and what does it cost? So we actually know what the end game looks like for cost. And that's when I did the math to say, oh, this would still be cheaper for people if they all agree to adopt, right? It is all about the timing.
Yeah.
I know this is getting a little far afield from my part, but it all actually matters in terms of that. Are we going to be capable enough to the task? When I get to that, there's got to be a scale and a gravitas and an ability. We need a much stronger BEPSA. I'm always the person at the board saying, Ken, you got to hire more staff faster. And others are like, no, we're pretty good where we are. And Ken sits there and tries to find a way to keep us all happy. We need a stronger BEPSA. We need more capable and more cooperative utilities. And we just have to be focused on what that future looks like.
Thank you. So,
They're just, so can you give me approximate what the price per kilowatt would be for that?
I think that we're going to be in the 30 cents kilowatt hour when we actually get to that point. And I think there's a lot of headroom over that before you're into gasoline and propane and oil prices. Now, if you're in Chittenden County or where there's natural gas, it's a different, the economic analysis is different. I haven't done that one, but there probably you can't get to 30 because natural gas generally has been pretty close to on par with electricity of today. Last I did that math, which was admittedly like 5 years ago when I was doing global energy consulting all over the place. So
quickly, last question.
How many of these utilities you're associated with on smart meter, automatic meter reading?
Today, none. Morrisville and Hyde Park will have AMI in place by the end of this year. Hyde Park will unfortunately be the only one in the state that will not have it because they've never participated in any process. So we're going to have to figure out, it's another one of those costs, like they are not on the technology game and the other things I talked about, those coming costs. So they're going to at some point have to catch up on that as well. But That's the first big technology investment we're all making as VEPSA members. All VEPSA members will have those in place, should be by the end of the year.
Scott, thank you so much. If folks have more questions for Scott, I'm sure they can follow up with him directly. That was a really interesting morning. For once, I guessed right. I allowed a ton of time and
And we needed it. That was.
yeah, and
Thank you.
yeah, it was a very useful morning. So thank you so much for being here. We are adjourned. We're off live.
I'm amazed to hear.
And you know,